A woman can build walls to keep out the cold, but sometimes the hardest thing to protect is her own heart. In the summer of 1885, near the rough hills outside Mercy Ridge, Montana, a young woman named Eliza Hartwell stood alone beneath the burning afternoon sun with a hammer in her hand, dust on her skirt, and a child growing beneath her heart. The cabin in front of her was not much yet. 4 corner posts, 2 half-raised walls, a stack of uneven pine boards, and a roof that existed only in her mind. To anyone passing by, it looked impossible. To Eliza, it looked like the only future she had left. She lifted the hammer again. The nail bent sideways. Eliza closed her eyes, breath through the ache in her back, then pulled it free and tried again. Her hand trembled, but she did not stop. She had learned that stopping was dangerous. If she stopped, she would remember the parlor in St. Louis, the polished floor, the cold voice of the man who had called her a burden, and the way he had looked at her unborn child as if it were an inconvenience instead of a life. So she worked. Every strike of the hammer said what her voice could not. I am still here. The people in Mercy Ridge had already made up their minds about her. They whispered that no decent pregnant woman came west alone. They said she must have done something shameful. They said the baby would never survive the winter in that unfinished place. At the mercantile, women looked at her belly before they looked at her face. Men spoke to her with false kindness, the sort that had a hook hidden underneath. Eliza heard all of it. She simply paid for nails, flour, lamp oil, and a second-hand handsaw, then walked out with her chin lifted and her boots leaving pale prints in the dust. At night, when the wind moved through the open frame of the cabin, she slept beside a small fire under a canvas tarp. She wrapped both arms around herself and whispered to the child inside her. "You and I are not begging for a place in this world," she said softly. "We are building one." The child shifted, light as a bird beneath her palm. That was enough to make Eliza smile, even with smoke in her eyes and blisters across both hands. She had come to Montana with 1 wagon, 3 trunks, a box of tools that had belonged to her father, and the deed to 40 acres of stubborn land nobody else wanted. The creek was hard to reach. The soil was rocky. The timber stood thick along the North Ridge, but there was water, there was space, there was silence. Most of all, there was no one telling her when to speak, how to sit, what to feel, or what she was allowed to become. That alone made the land worth every hardship. By the 3rd week, Eliza had learned to measure twice before cutting. She had learned which boards were too green, which stones would hold a foundation, and how to brace a wall with ropes when no man stood on the other side to help lift it. She had dropped a beam once and sat in the dirt for a full minute, holding her ankle and biting the inside of her cheek until the pain passed. Then she got up. Because there was no one else. Because winter did not care if she was tired. Because her child needed a roof before the first snow. The first time Garrett Vale saw her, he had not meant to stop. He was riding the southern boundary of the Vale Ranch, a spread so large it took 3 days to cross in good weather. Garrett was the kind of man people noticed before he spoke, tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulders, with a calm face shaped by sun, work, and too many decisions made alone. His family had cattle, water rights, hay fields, and a ranch house with glass windows on every side. He had everything most men in Mercy Ridge wanted. Yet there were mornings when Garrett looked across all that land and felt nothing but the weight of it. He had ridden out because his foreman mentioned smoke rising near the Old North Claim. Garrett expected to find a drifter, a squatter, maybe some careless men cutting timber where they had no right. Instead, he found Eliza Hartwell standing on a plank balanced between 2 wall frames, 6 months pregnant, holding a hammer like she had made a promise to God and meant to keep it. His horse slowed on its own. Eliza heard the reins creak and turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Garrett saw the loose braid falling over her shoulder, the faded blue dress patched at the elbow, the dust across her cheek, and the fierce steadiness in her eyes. He also saw the cabin, not just the weakness in it, but the strength. The corner posts were straight. The south wall was braced well. The door opening was square. Whoever this woman was, she was not playing at survival. She was doing it. Eliza looked down from the plank. You lost. Garrett almost smiled. Not because the question was funny, but because no one had asked him that on Vale land in years. No, ma'am, he said. I was riding the boundary. Then ride it. Her voice was calm, but there was iron under it. Garrett removed his hat, more out of respect than habit. Name S. Garrett Vale. I know the name. Then you know my ranch borders this claim. I know where my land ends, Mr. Vale. He glanced at the wall frame beside her. You building this alone? Eliza lifted the hammer again. Looks that way. That ridge beam will take 2 men. Then I suppose I'll have to think like 3. This time he did smile, though only a little. It disappeared almost at once when he saw her sway. It was slight, so slight most men would have missed it, but Garrett had spent his life watching horses hide pain until they nearly broke beneath a saddle. Eliza's hand tightened around the upright post. Her face did not change, but her body had told the truth before her pride could stop it. Garrett stepped forward, careful. The word was quiet, but Eliza's eyes flashed. Do not come closer. He stopped at once. That surprised her. She had expected argument. Men usually mistook warning for invitation to prove they were stronger. Garrett simply stood where he was, one hand loose at his side, his horse shifting behind him. I was not coming to take over, he said. No, Eliza answered. Men never say they are. The words struck him harder than she meant them to. Not because they were sharp, but because they had history behind them. He could hear it. A door closed somewhere, a voice remembered, a wound hidden under careful manners. Garrett looked at the unfinished cabin again, then at the woman standing above him with sun on her face and pain buried behind her eyes. I have extra straight lumber at my place, he said, left from a barn repair. I did not ask. I know. Then why offer? He put his hat back on slowly. Because that wall will hold better with straight boards, and because you look like the sort of woman who would rather hear the truth than a compliment. Eliza stared at him. For the first time that day, her grip on the hammer eased. The wind moved through the open frame of the cabin. Somewhere beyond the trees, a hawk cried. Garrett waited, not pushing, not smiling now, not pretending kindness was harmless. At last Eliza said, If you bring lumber, you do not touch this cabin unless I say so. Garrett gave one slow nod. Fair. You do not give orders. No, ma'am. You do not decide what I need. His eyes softened just enough to trouble her. No, ma'am. Eliza looked away first, angry at herself for noticing that softness. Tomorrow at sunrise, she said. If you are late, I start without you. Garrett mounted his horse. I expect you would. He rode away through the timber, but before the trees swallowed him, he looked back once. Eliza was still standing on the plank, one hand resting against the frame of a house she had no guarantee would save her. But Garrett Vale had seen enough to know one thing clearly. That woman was not only building a cabin. She was hiding from something. And whatever it was coming closer. Garrett Vale arrived before sunrise. Eliza knew because she had been awake long before the first pale light touched the ridge. Sleep had come in pieces that night, broken by the wind pushing at the canvas above her, by the ache in her hips, and by the thought of a rich rancher riding back with lumber he had no reason to give. She did not like gifts. Gifts had weight. Gifts made people feel entitled to step closer, speak softer, ask questions they had no right to ask. In St. Louis, every fine thing Cyrus Bellamy had ever placed in her hands had turned into a chain later. A necklace became proof of gratitude owed. A dress became proof she belonged in his rooms, at his table under his decisions. Even kindness had been used like a receipt. So when Garrett came through the trees with 2 pack horses behind him, each loaded with clean boards tied tight in rope, Eliza stood in front of the cabin with her hammer already in her hand. The sky behind him was soft gray, and the cold Mopart forarning made steam rise from the horses' backs. Garrett wore a dark coat over his work shirt, his hat pulled low, his face quiet and unreadable. He stopped a good distance away. "Morning," he said. Eliza looked at the lumber. "That is more than you mentioned." "It was more than I remembered." "That happened often with rich men." His mouth moved like he almost smiled, but he did not. "Remembering wrong. Having more than they admit." Garrett took that without offense. He dismounted, then untied the first rope with slow, deliberate hands. "You can count every board before it comes off the horse." "I intend to." "I figured." That answer bothered her because it did not push back. It did not mock her caution. It simply made room for it. Eliza crossed the yard, careful over the uneven ground, and counted the boards one by one while Garrett stood aside. Her belly made bending difficult, so she used the handle of her hammer to point and count. 24 boards, straight, dry, and valuable. Too valuable to be called scrap. "This is not leftover lumber," she said. "No." She turned on him. "Yesterday you said it was." "Yesterday I thought if I told you it was mine, you would refuse it before you looked at it." "I am refusing it now." Garrett nodded once. "You can." The simple permission took the sharpness from her next words. She disliked that too. Eliza looked back at the boards. The cabin needed them. That was the truth she could not ignore. The south wall would go up cleaner. The window frame would hold better. The roof braces would not take half the daylight to shape by hand. And winter was not waiting for her pride to feel safe. "I will pay," she said. Garrett looked at the half-built wall, then at her. "With what?" "My work." "You already have enough work." "With a note, then. I can pay after harvest, or after I sell firewood, or after I take sewing in town." "You do not owe me a debt, Mrs. Hartwell." Her eyes snapped up. "Miss Hartwell." The correction came fast, hard and colder than the morning. Garrett stilled. Something in his face changed, not curiosity, not pity, more like careful understanding. "Miss Hartwell," he said. Eliza looked away, angry with herself for revealing even that much. She heard him remove another rope. "We can write it down if that makes it easier." She looked back. "What?" "A fair trade, lumber for work. You decide the terms, I sign it. That way it is not charity." The wind stirred the loose hair at Eliza's temple. She studied him in the weak morning light. "Why would you do that?" "Because you said you do not want a debt." "That is not an answer." Garrett rested one hand on the saddle. His fingers were scarred, his nails clean but not soft. They were hands that knew rains, rope, timber, and cold water at dawn. "My mother hated debts," he said quietly. "After my father died, men came around our place offering help with the same look in their eyes, like every kindness was a door they expected her to open later. She taught me that help without respect is just another way to own somebody." Eliza felt the words settle somewhere she did not want them to settle. For a moment she saw him differently. Not the rich rancher from the largest spread in the valley. Not the broad-shouldered man who rode like the world gave way for him. Just a boy once, standing behind a widowed mother, learning the shape of unwanted help. She lowered the hammer. "You said your family owns the Vale Ranch." "My father started it. My mother kept it alive. I inherited more than I earned." "At least you know it." "I try to." A small silence formed between them. It was not comfortable yet, but it was honest. Eliza went inside the cabin and returned with a folded sheet of paper from her trunk. It was one of only 6 clean sheets she owned. She carried it like something precious, then set it on an overturned crate beside the door. "You will write," she said. Garrett took the pencil she offered. Lumber delivered to Eliza Hartwell for construction of her legal homestead cabin, she said. Payment to be made by 3 months of mending, washing, or ledger work if needed, at fair town rate, or by cash when available. Garrett wrote every word exactly as she spoke it. Add this, she said. No claim of ownership, authority, or personal obligation is created by this agreement. His pencil paused. Then he wrote it. When he finished, he signed his name and handed the paper back. Eliza read it twice before folding it and tucking it inside the small tin box near her bedroll. Only then did she let him unload the boards. They worked through the morning. At first, Eliza watched him like a hawk. When he lifted a board, she checked where he placed it. When he measured, she measured again. When he reached for the saw, she told him which cut needed doing before he could decide on his own. Garrett obeyed each instruction without comment. That made him harder to dislike. By mid-morning, the sun spilled over the ridge, painting the raw cabin wood gold. Dust floated in the light. A horse shifted near the trees. The steady rhythm of their work filled the air. Saw teeth biting, hammer striking, boots moving over packed dirt. Garrett was stronger than she was. There was no denying it. He lifted what she had to drag. He braced what she had to rope into place, but he never moved ahead of her plan. He waited for her nod before setting a board. He asked before cutting. Once, when she climbed onto the lower brace to fit a plank herself, he raised one hand as if to steady her, then stopped before touching her. Eliza saw that. He saw her see it. "I can manage," she said. "I know." "Then why did you move?" "Because the ground is uneven there." She glanced down. It was. A small stone sat half buried beneath her left boot. Eliza shifted her foot, swallowed a sigh, and nailed the plank into place. By noon, the south wall had taken shape. Straight boards, clean lines, a window opening framed where winter sunlight would come through. Eliza stepped back, one hand pressed to the small of her back. She tried not to show how much pain moved through her. Garrett did not ask if she was all right. Instead, he said, "That wall looks strong." Pride rose in her chest before she could stop it. "It is," she said. "Because you planned it right." She glanced at him. "You are careful with compliments." "I have learned most people do not need as many as they are given." "And what do they need?" He looked at the cabin, then at her hand resting over the curve of her belly. "Someone who tells the truth and stays when the work gets hard." The answer touched something too tender. Eliza turned away and reached for the water pail. "I will make coffee," she said. "That does not mean we are friends." "No, ma'am." "And you will not sit too close." "No, ma'am." "And you will not ask about the child." Garrett's voice softened. "No, ma'am." She hated that softness because it did not sound like pity. Pity would have been easier. She could refuse pity. She could throw it back at him like a hot coal. This was respect. Respect was more dangerous. They sat in the narrow strip of shade beside the unfinished wall, each with a tin cup of coffee so strong it tasted half-burned. Eliza ate cornbread from a cloth. She offered him a piece because manners still lived in her bones, no matter how hard the world had tried to strip them out. Garrett accepted it with a nod. For a long while, neither spoke. Then he said, "The town speaks of you." Eliza stared into her cup. The town speaks because silence would require mercy. Garrett looked at her. She took another sip. "I know what they say." "They are wrong." "You do not know that." "I know enough." A bitter smile touched her mouth. Men always think they know enough. Garrett did not answer at once. He rubbed his thumb over a scar across his knuckle. "My brother thought that," he said. "He died thinking it." Eliza looked at him despite herself. Garrett's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "He rode into a storm 5 years ago to prove he was braver than weather. I told him to wait. He laughed at me. They found his horse 2 days later." The wind moved softly between them. "I am sorry," Eliza said. "So am I." Garrett looked toward the ridge. "After that, my mother said there are two kinds of pride. One keeps you standing. The other keeps you from taking a hand when the river rises." Eliza set her cup down slowly. "And which kind do you think I have?" "I do not know yet." At least he was honest. She studied him for a long moment, and against her better judgment, something inside her eased. Before she could answer, a sound came from the trail. A wagon. Not close yet, but coming. Eliza stood too quickly. Pain pulled across her side and she gripped the wall frame. Garrett rose but did not touch her. A dark wagon rolled into view between the pines. The driver was Silas Pike, owner of the Mercy Ridge Mercantile, a thin man with a narrow mouth and eyes that always seemed to be measuring profit. Beside him sat his wife, wearing a stiff bonnet and a look of eager judgment. The wagon stopped in front of the claim. Silas looked at Garrett first, then at Eliza, then at the unfinished cabin. His mouth curved. "Well now," he said, "ain't this a sight worth telling?" Eliza's hand tightened around the hammer. Garrett stepped forward, not in front of her but beside her. That small choice did not escape her. Silas smiled wider. "Miss Hartwell, folks in town were wondering how a woman in your condition was managing all this heavy work. I suppose now we have our answer." Heat rose in Eliza's face, but she kept her voice steady. "My work is my answer, Mr. Pike." Mrs. Pike's eyes moved to Garrett. "Does Mr. Vale's mother know he is out here spending mornings with a woman alone?" Garrett's expression cooled. "My mother has better manners than to ask questions like that from a wagon seat." Mrs. Pike flushed. Silas clicked his tongue. "Careful, Garrett. People may start to wonder what kind of arrangement this is." Eliza lifted her chin. "It is a lumber agreement, written and signed." "How proper," Silas said, "though paper does not stop gossip." "No," Garrett said quietly, "but character should." The words landed hard enough that even the horses seemed still for a breath. Silas's smile thinned. Character is exactly what folks are questioning. Eliza felt the old fear move inside her, not fear of Silas, but fear of what talk could become. Talk could reach courts. Talk could reach men with polished boots and legal papers. Talk could turn a woman's home into evidence against her. Garrett saw the change in her face. His voice became low. "You have delivered your insult, Pike. Now move along." Silas looked ready to answer, but something in Garrett's eyes changed his mind. He snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled on toward town. Dust rose behind it. Eliza stood still until it faded. Then she turned to Garrett. "You should not have spoken for me." "I did not." "You told him to leave." "I told him to leave after you answered him." "That distinction matters to you." Garrett looked at her directly. "It matters to you." Eliza had no answer for that. The afternoon passed with less talking. They finished the lower braces and stacked the remaining boards beneath canvas. Garrett gathered his tools as the sun dropped toward the western hills. "I will not come tomorrow," he said. Eliza looked up. "Why?" "Because town will be watching the trail now. If I come every day, Pike will make a story out of it." "You care what people think." "I care what they can do with what they think." She understood that too well. Garrett tied his bedroll behind his saddle. "I will send one of my ranch hands with nails and hinges, paid under our agreement if you want them." "I do not want your ranch hands here." "Then I will leave them at the creek crossing." She nodded once. He mounted, then hesitated. "Miss Hartwell." She looked at him. "If gossip reaches you before I do, remember something. A lie can travel fast, but it still has to answer to the truth when it arrives." Eliza watched him ride away, the last light catching the dust around his horse's legs. For the first time since she had come to Mercy Ridge, The land did not feel entirely empty after he left. That frightened her more than the gossip. She went inside the cabin, opened the tin box, and placed Garrett's signed agreement beneath her mother's photograph. Under it lay another paper. A letter she had not opened in 3 weeks. The seal was broken now from too much handling, but the words inside had not changed. Cyrus Bellamy's neat handwriting waited on the page like a snake in tall grass. "You cannot hide forever, Eliza. The child carries my name." Eliza closed the box with shaking fingers. Outside, far down the trail toward town, the pike wagon disappeared into the dusk. And by morning, Mercy Ridge would know Garrett Vale had been seen standing beside the pregnant woman, building a cabin alone. By noon the next day, Mercy Ridge had turned Eliza Hartwell into a story. By evening, the story had grown teeth. At the mercantile, Silas Pike leaned against the counter and spoke low enough to sound private, but loud enough for every waiting ear to catch. He said Garrett Vale had been seen alone on Eliza's claim before sunrise. He said there were signed papers between them, though nobody knew what kind. He said no decent woman with a child on the way would allow a wealthy rancher to spend hours beside her unless there was something more than lumber being exchanged. His wife added a soft sigh after every sentence, as though cruelty became concern when wrapped in a bonnet. By the time the news reached the church ladies, Garrett had been bringing her supplies for weeks. By the time it reached the blacksmith, Garrett was planning to hide her in a cabin on Vale land. By the time it reached the Vale ranch, Eliza had trapped the richest unmarried rancher in the county with tears, weakness, and a child that was not his. None of it was true. That did not slow it. Eliza heard the first version from Amos Reed, the 12-year-old boy who sometimes carried mail from town to her claim. He arrived near sunset with a sack of hinges Garrett had left at the creek crossing and a face full of discomfort. He stood near the woodpile, twisting his cap in both hands. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "my ma says I ought not come out here no more." Eliza paused with a chisel in her hand. Amos looked ashamed, though he had done nothing wrong. "She says folks are talking, says it ain't proper." The words should not have hurt. Eliza had heard worse. Still, something in her chest tightened. Amos was only a boy. He had never judged her. He had carried mail, hauled boards, accepted biscuits when she had them, and once told her the south wall looked straighter than the church porch. Losing his small kindness felt like losing one of the few clean things Mercy Ridge had given her. "I understand," she said. "I don't want to stop." "I know." He swallowed. "I told Ma you pay fair." "That was kind of you." She said fair pay don't make a place respectable. Eliza set the chisel down before her grip showed too much. The evening light stretched across the cabin floor. The south window Garrett had helped frame caught the gold of the sinking sun, laying it in a bright square at her feet. For a moment she stared at that light and wished people could see the work instead of the gossip. The walls, the floor, the aching hands, the cold nights, the child she spoke to when fear got too loud. But people often saw what gave them power. Truth asked effort. Gossip gave pleasure. Eliza forced her face calm and stepped inside. She returned with 2 coins and a folded napkin holding a piece of cornbread. "Here," she said, "for today's delivery." Amos shook his head. "Ma said not to take any more money from you." "Then take it for yourself and tell her you found it on the road." His eyes widened, then he laughed despite himself. Eliza smiled a little. "That was not proper advice. Forget I said it." He took the coin slowly. "I don't think bad of you, Miss Hartwell." For the first time all day, her eyes stung. "I know, Amos." He looked toward the cabin. "You think you'll finish before snow?" "I will." He nodded as if that settled the matter. Then he climbed onto his small mule and rode back toward town, leaving Eliza alone with the hinges, the cooling air, and the knowledge that Mercy Ridge had begun closing its doors before winter ever arrived. She stood still until the trail was empty. Then she went back to work. That night the wind rose hard from the north. It rushed down the slope and slipped through every unfinished crack in the cabin, rattling the canvas over her supplies and pushing smoke sideways from the little outdoor fire. Eliza wrapped herself in a shawl and sat on the threshold with the tin box on her lap. Inside were the few things that proved she had been someone before Mercy Ridge decided who she was. Her mother's photograph, the lumber agreement Garrett had signed, the deed to the claim, and Cyrus Bellamy's letter. She opened it again, though she knew every word. "You cannot hide forever, Eliza. The child carries my name." It was not the worst line. The worst line came near the bottom. "A court will understand what you refuse to understand. A wife does not simply leave because she has taken offense." Eliza folded the letter carefully, though her hands were shaking. She had not been Cyrus Bellamy's wife by love for a long time. She had been his wife by paper, by reputation, by the kind of law written by men who had never asked what happened inside a quiet house after the guests went home. Cyrus had not shouted. He had not struck her. He had not needed to. He had corrected her into silence. He had praised her only when she disappeared behind his wishes. He had spoken of the child like a business complication. And when Eliza said she would not be sent away to his cousin's house until the birth, he had looked at her with calm disappointment and said, "You are making this harder than it needs to be." That was when she understood. He did not see her leaving as escape. He saw it as disobedience. The next morning Garrett did not come. He had said he would not, and he kept his word. Eliza told herself she was grateful. The work was quieter without him. No one watched her climb, no one noticed when she pressed a hand to her side, no one made the space feel warmer simply by standing in it. She hated that she noticed the difference. Near mid-morning, she carried the hinges to the doorway and began fitting the heavier latch. The door was rough but strong, made of boards she had planed herself until her wrists ached. A good door mattered, not just for cold, but for the feeling of closing something behind her. A cabin was not a home until it had a door that listened when you asked it to stay shut. She was tightening the second hinge when a rider appeared at the edge of the trees. Not Garrett. This horse was smaller, neat, brushed carefully, with a silver-trimmed bridle. The woman riding it sat straight-backed in a dark green traveling dress, her gloved hands resting lightly on the reins. She looked no older than 25, with smooth brown hair pinned beneath a fine hat and a face composed in the practiced way of someone raised to be seen. Eliza stepped down from the crate. The woman stopped near the yard and looked at the cabin, then at Eliza's belly, then at Eliza's face. "Miss Hartwell." "Yes." "I am Rosalind Mercer." The name meant nothing at first. Then Eliza remembered a whisper from town, spoken near the mercantile shelves while women pretended not to watch her. Rosalind Mercer, mill owner's daughter, educated back east, expected by many to marry Garrett Vale. Eliza set the wrench on the crate. "What brings you here, Miss Mercer?" Rosalind looked toward the cabin again. Her expression did not twist with open cruelty. That almost made it worse. Her judgment was polished, disciplined, carried like a clean white glove. "I thought it best to speak plainly," Rosalind said. "There is talk in town." "So I hear." "Talk can ruin a woman." Eliza gave a humorless smile. Only if the town was willing to respect her first. Rosalind's face tightened. "It can also ruin a man. Garrett has responsibilities. His mother depends on him. His ranch hands depend on him. The valley depends on his good name more than you may understand." There it was. Not concern for truth. Concern for a man's name. Eliza felt the child move gently inside her, as if reminding her not to let anger take the reins. "I have not asked Garrett Vale for anything improper," she said. Improper things rarely begin by asking. Eliza's hand curled around the edge of the crate. Rosalind seemed to regret the sharpness, or perhaps only the lack of grace in it. She looked down briefly, then back up. "I do not know what brought you here," Rosalind said. "I do not know what sorrow you carry, but if Garrett has taken pity on you, please do not mistake that for something deeper. He has always been soft toward wounded things." The words struck. Not because Eliza believed them. Because some part of her feared them. Pity was the one thing she had promised never to live under again. Pity smiled and decided. Pity helped and expected obedience. Pity made a woman smaller while pretending to lift her. Eliza picked up the hinge and turned back to the door. "You may leave now." Rosalind's horse shifted. "I am trying to prevent pain." "No," Eliza said, fitting the hinge into place with slow hands. "You are trying to keep your future neat." Rosalind went quiet. Eliza looked back at her. "If Garrett Vale belongs to you, then he is poorly trained because he did not mention it." Color touched Rosalind's cheeks. "We have an understanding." "Then take your understanding to him." Rosalind's composure cracked for half a second. Beneath it, Eliza saw not only pride but fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when a person has built her whole life around a promise no one ever spoke aloud. "I have waited 3 years," Rosalind said softly. 3 years while he buried himself in work and grief and duty. Do you know what it is to wait for a man to finally look at you?" Eliza's anger faltered. Because that was not cruelty. That was a wound. She lowered the hinge. "I know what it is to wait for a man to become someone he never intended to be," Eliza said. "It is not the same thing, but it leaves a mark too." For a moment, the two women looked at each other across the dusty yard, both trapped by different versions of hope. Then Rosalind gathered her reins. "I hope you finish your cabin before the cold," she said. It was stiff but not empty. Eliza nodded. "I hope Garrett tells you the truth, whatever it is." Rosalind rode away slower than she had arrived. Eliza watched her until the trees took her. Only then did she sit on the crate and press both hands against her belly. Her heart was beating too fast. She told herself it was anger. She told herself it was the surprise of a visitor. She told herself it was worry over town gossip and Cyrus and winter. But beneath all of that was something more dangerous. Rosalind Mercer's visit had hurt because Garrett Vale had begun to matter. That was the truth. Eliza sat with it in the cold noon light and did not know what to do with it. If you have ever watched someone strong try not to need anyone, stay with this story, because Eliza's hardest battle is not with the town. It is with the part of her heart that still wants to believe love can be safe. Garrett came the next morning. He rode in slowly as though he already knew the air had changed. His face was tired. There was dust on his coat and a cut near his thumb. He stopped near the creek first, dismounted, and walked the rest of the way leading his horse. Eliza was fitting the door latch. She did not look at him. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Mr. Vale." He paused at the formality. "I heard Rosalind came here." Eliza tightened a screw. Mercy Ridge carries news faster than the telegraph. "I did not send her." "I did not think you did." "She had no right." "She had concern." Garrett's jaw worked slightly. "That is a generous word." Eliza turned then. "Do you have an understanding with her?" The question stood between them like a loaded wagon on a narrow bridge. Garrett took his hat off. "No," he said, "not when I agreed to." "That is not the same as no." He looked away toward the ridge, then back at her. "Our family spoke of it. Her father wants the connection. My mother likes her. Rosalind has been kind to me. I never promised marriage." "But you allowed hope." The words came sharper than she intended. Garrett accepted them anyway. "Yes," he said quietly, "I reckon I did." Eliza looked at him. and something inside her pulled back hard. A man who allowed hope without making a promise could still break a woman clean in two. Garrett stepped no closer. "I have been wrong in cowardly ways," he said. "Not loud ones, not cruel ones, but wrong all the same." Eliza wanted to keep her face still, but his honesty unsettled her. "I cannot be part of another woman's humiliation," she said. "You are not. That is easy for you to say." "No," Garrett said. "It is not easy. I rode to the Mercer place last night and told Rosalind plainly that I would not marry her. I should have done it long before you came to this valley." Eliza's hand fell from the latch. Garrett held her gaze. "I hurt her by waiting," he said. "That is mine to answer for, but I will not let anyone make you the reason. You are not." The wind moved around the cabin. Eliza should have felt relief. Instead, she felt fear, because with Rosalind removed from the story, there was less standing between her and the truth of what Garrett's presence had become. She looked down at the latch. "I need to finish this door." Garrett nodded. "May I hold it steady?" Eliza hesitated. It was such a small thing. A door, a hand on the wood, a man waiting for permission. But some choices only look small from the outside. "Yes," she said. Garrett stepped forward and placed both hands against the door, holding it steady while Eliza fitted the latch into place. Their hands did not touch. Still, she felt the nearness of him like warmth from a stove. The latch clicked. The sound was small, clean, final. Eliza tested it once, then again. Garrett smiled faintly. "Good door." "Yes," she said, but her voice came softer than she meant. "It is." For a moment, they stood on opposite sides of the open doorway, looking at each other through the frame of the home she had built. Then a horse came hard through the trees. Both turned. Amos Reed burst into the clearing on his mule, breathless, pale, and waving a paper in one hand. "Miss Hartwell," he called, "there's a man in town asking for you." Eliza's blood went cold. Garrett stepped toward the boy. "What man?" Amos swallowed. "Fine coat, black gloves, came in on the morning coach, said his name was Mr. Bellamy." Eliza's hand moved to her belly. The door she had just finished stood open behind her. And for the first time since she came to Montana, the past had found the trail to her home. For a moment, Eliza Hartwell could not hear anything but her own heartbeat. It sounded louder than Amos Reed's frightened breathing, louder than Garrett's horse shifting near the trees, louder than the wind sliding through the half-finished cabin door behind her. The name Cyrus Bellamy seemed to hang in the clearing like smoke from a fire that had finally reached dry grass. Garrett looked at her first, not at Amos. That told Eliza something. He understood the name was not simply a name. It was a door opening behind her, and whatever stood on the other side had made the blood leave her face. "Where is he now?" Garrett asked. Amos swallowed. "At the hotel. Mr. Pike took him there. He asked about Miss Hartwell's land claim, and then he asked if folks knew whether she was alone." Garrett's jaw tightened. Eliza forced herself to breathe. "Did he say he was coming here?" "No, ma'am, not yet, but Mr. Pike told him where the North Trail runs." "Of course he did." Silas Pike would call it helpful. His wife would call it proper. By supper, half the town would call it justice. People loved to stand near a woman's hardship and name it something noble, as long as they did not have to feel the cold themselves. Eliza pressed one hand against the doorframe. The wood was rough beneath her palm. She had fitted that frame with her own hands. She had raised those walls. She had made this place real nail by nail, breath by breath, ache by ache. She looked at the cabin because she needed to remind herself that she was not standing in Cyrus Bellamy's parlor anymore. She was standing on her land. "Thank you, Amos," she said. The boy looked near tears. "I came fast as I could." "You did right." Garrett reached into his coat and gave the boy a coin. Amos shook his head, but Garrett closed the boy's fingers around it gently. For your mule, Garrett said. He earned it too. Amos nodded, climbed back onto the mule and rode away through the trees, looking over his shoulder twice before the trail turned. When he was gone, the clearing felt too quiet. Garrett turned to Eliza. Tell me what he wants. Eliza laughed once, but there was no humor in it. He wants what he always wants: order, control, the final word. And the child. Her hand moved to her belly before she could stop it. He never wanted this child, she said. Not truly. He wanted a perfect house, perfect dinners, perfect guests, and a wife who made him look generous without ever needing anything from him. When I told him I was with child, he looked at me like I had misplaced a ledger. Garrett's eyes darkened, but he stayed still. Eliza appreciated that stillness more than she wanted to. He planned to send me away before the birth, she continued. To his cousin's home outside St. Louis. He said it would be better for my nerves, better for appearances, better for him, really. I knew if I went I would never decide anything for my child, not her name, not her room, not the shape of her days. Garrett's voice was low, her. Eliza looked down. The word had slipped out. For weeks she had guarded even that small hope from the world. She did not know for certain, of course, but in her heart she had begun calling the child her daughter. A little girl with dark hair, maybe, or light. A child who would know the smell of pine boards and rain on soil, not only polished floors and rules. I think so, Eliza said softly. I do not know, but I think so. Garrett nodded, as if she had handed him something delicate and he knew better than to close his fist around it. What is her name? He asked. Eliza's throat tightened. No one had asked that, not Cyrus, not the doctor in St. Louis, not anyone in Mercy Ridge. They had spoken of the baby as shame, burden, danger, claim, mistake. Garrett was the first person to ask, as though the child was already a soul waiting to be welcomed. June, Eliza said, if she is a girl. Garrett looked toward the cabin. June Hartwell. Eliza blinked. He had used her name. Not Bellamy. Not the name on Cyrus's letters. Hartwell. Something inside her shook harder than fear. Before she could answer, Garrett stepped back, giving her the space his words had almost crossed. What can Cyrus do legally? He asked. Eliza returned to the ground beneath her feet. Practical questions were safer. He can say I left the marital home without cause. He can say I am unwell. He can say a woman in my condition cannot live alone here. He can say I took money that belonged to him. Did you? I took money that belonged to me before I married him. Her voice sharpened. My father left it. Cyrus placed it in his account after the wedding because he said managing money would worry me. I kept count of every dollar. I took less than what was mine. Garrett nodded. Do you have proof? Eliza went inside the cabin and returned with the tin box. She opened it on the crate near the doorway and removed 3 folded papers. Her hands were steady now, because anger had settled over fear like a warm coat. My father's estate letter, Cyrus's household accounts, my own notes. Garrett looked at the papers but did not touch them. You need a lawyer. I need money for a lawyer. You have some. Not enough for a good one. I know one in Helena. No. The answer came too fast. Garrett studied her. Why? Because if he knows you, Cyrus will say I used you. If your lawyer helps me, he will say I hid under the Vale name. He will turn your help into another chain around my neck. Garrett did not argue. He simply looked at the cabin, then the ridge, then back at her. There is a man in Bozeman, he said. Elias Porter. He handled a water rights fight against my ranch 3 years ago and beat us badly enough that my mother still says his name like a curse. He owes me nothing. In fact, he dislikes me. Despite everything, Eliza almost smiled. That is a fine recommendation. He is honest, expensive but honest. I cannot pay expensive. I can. No. Eliza. It was the first time he said her given name. Not Miss Hartwell, not ma'am. Eliza. It moved through her, in a way she did not permit herself to show. Garrett seemed to realize what he had done. He looked down briefly, then back at her. Forgive me. She should have corrected him. She did not. I will not let you pay for my lawyer, she said. Then do not let me. Let me buy the table you have not built yet. Let me buy the winter firewood you have not cut yet. Let me buy whatever work you decide is fair, and use that money how you please. You are twisting the matter. I am trying to keep you from facing a man with money and lawyers by yourself. I have faced him by myself before. I know, his voice grew quieter. That is what I am afraid of. Eliza looked at him then. The words were not romantic. They were not grand. They did not ask anything of her. Yet they struck deeper than any fine speech Cyrus had ever made across a dinner table with candles burning and guests smiling. Garrett was afraid for her, but not because he thought her weak. He was afraid because he had begun to understand how much strength had already cost her. A sound came from the ridge. Both of them turned. Not a wagon this time. Hooves. 2 horses moving slowly through the pines, not fast enough to be careless, not quiet enough to be friendly. Garrett's hand moved toward his side, then stopped. He carried no gun where Eliza could see. She was grateful for that. This was not the kind of story she wanted her child to feel through her body. A man in a black traveling coat appeared first. Cyrus Bellamy rode a dark bay horse with a polished saddle and gloves too clean for the trail. Even from a distance, Eliza knew the set of his shoulders. Straight, controlled, certain that every room, every road, every woman would adjust around him. Beside him rode Silas Pike, sitting proud as if he had delivered something valuable. Eliza did not step back. Garrett moved 1 pace, not ahead of her, not behind her, but beside her. Again. Cyrus noticed. His eyes went from Garrett to Eliza's belly to the cabin door. His face held no shock. Cyrus never gave people the satisfaction of seeing surprise. Instead, he smiled faintly, the same smile he used when correcting a servant in front of guests. Eliza, he said, you have made yourself difficult to find. Her hand rested lightly on the doorframe. I was not lost. Cyrus's smile thinned. Silas Pike cleared his throat. I thought it proper to bring Mr. Bellamy out, seeing as he is family. Eliza looked at Silas. You have brought a man onto my property without my invitation. Silas's confidence flickered. Now, Miss Hartwell, he says you are his wife. Eliza Bellamy is my wife, Cyrus said calmly, and the child she carries is mine. Garrett's face hardened. You will speak to her with respect. Cyrus looked at him with mild interest, as one might look at an animal that had performed an unexpected trick. And you are? Garrett Vale. Recognition flashed, brief, sharp, and quickly hidden. Ah, Cyrus said, that explains the rumors. Eliza felt Garrett tense, but he kept his voice even. There would be fewer rumors if men like Pike did not feed on them. Silas flushed. I brought him because it was right. No, Eliza said. You brought him because gossip needed a fresh meal. Cyrus's eyes turned back to her. Eliza, you are embarrassing yourself. There it was. Not anger. Not pleading. Correction. A cool sentence made to place her back beneath him. For half a breath, the clearing faded and she was in St. Louis again, standing in a parlor while Cyrus adjusted her words, her posture, her thoughts, until even her silence belonged to him. Then the baby moved. A firm little push beneath her ribs. Eliza drew breath. No, she said, I am standing on my land. Cyrus looked at the cabin. This is not land. This is a hardship you have mistaken for freedom. It is mine. You have no idea what you are doing. She lifted her chin. I built 4 walls, a door, and half a roof. That is more than some men build with a lifetime of telling others what to do. Garrett looked away, but she saw the corner of his mouth move. Cyrus did not smile. "I came to settle this privately," he said. "Come back to town. We will leave for St. Louis tomorrow. I will overlook the money you took and the company you have kept here." Eliza's fingers tightened around the doorframe. "I am not going with you." "Eliza." "No." Cyrus sighed. "You are tired, you are frightened. Your condition is affecting your judgment." Garrett's voice cut in quietly. "Her judgment built that cabin." Cyrus turned to him. "Mr. Vale, I understand how this may look from your side. A vulnerable woman alone, grateful for attention, perhaps charming in her desperation. But this is a family matter." Eliza stepped forward before Garrett could speak. "No," she said. "It stopped being a family matter when you followed me across the territory like property you misplaced." Silas shifted in his saddle. Cyrus's smile vanished. For the first time his true face came close to the surface. Not fully, never fully, but enough. "You are my wife," he said softly. "I was," Eliza said, "on paper." "You still are." "Then take your paper to court." The silence after that was wide and dangerous. Cyrus looked at her for a long moment, then at the cabin, then at Garrett. "Very well," he said. "If you prefer public shame, I will not deny it to you." He turned his horse. Silas looked disappointed that no larger scene had unfolded. Before they rode away, Cyrus paused. "One more thing," he said without looking back. "A judge will not admire a woman who places pride above her child's safety, nor will he admire a man who uses a lonely woman's scandal for his own amusement." Garrett's hands closed around his reins. Eliza answered before he could. "Then I will show the judge my walls." Cyrus looked back then, and something dark passed through his eyes. "You always did mistake stubbornness for strength." Eliza held his gaze. "And you always mistook obedience for love." For one clean second, Cyrus had no answer. Then he rode away with Silas Pike trailing behind him. Only when the trees swallowed them did Eliza's knees weaken. Garrett reached out, stopped himself, and waited. That nearly undid her. "I am all right," she said, though her voice had gone thin. "No," Garrett said gently, "but you are standing." She looked at him then, and all the fear she had held back pressed against her eyes. "He will not stop." "I know. He will use the law. Then we use the truth. He has money. You have evidence. He has witnesses." Garrett looked at the cabin, at the door, at the boards, at the papers still open in the tin box. "So do you." Eliza followed his gaze. The cabin stood in the afternoon sun, unfinished but real. Every board was a witness, every receipt, every scar on her hand, every careful mark in her building book. Every hour she had chosen courage when fear would have been easier. She turned back to Garrett. "Elias Porter," she said, "the lawyer in Bozeman." Garrett nodded. "I will ride tonight if you want." "No," she said, "we ride together tomorrow." His eyes searched hers, surprised and something more. "Together?" Eliza picked up the tin box and held it close. "Yes," she said, "but not because I need saving." Garrett's voice softened. "No, ma'am. Because I need a witness." He gave one slow nod. "Then that is what I will be." The wind moved through the doorway, lifting a loose curl against Eliza's cheek. She looked at Garrett standing beside the cabin she had built, and for the first time she allowed herself to wonder what kind of man did not rush to rescue a woman, but waited until she asked him to stand beside her. That thought was still in her mind when thunder rolled faintly beyond the western hills. Garrett looked up. A storm was coming. Eliza looked at the open roof, the exposed boards, the papers in her hand, and the road Cyrus had taken back toward town. By tomorrow, she would need a lawyer. By nightfall, she would need a roof. And before the storm reached Mercy Ridge, she would have to decide whether trusting Garrett Vale was the next board in the house she was building, or the first crack in its wall. The storm reached Mercy Ridge before sunset. It came over the western hills with a low black belly, dragging wind through the pines and bending the grass flat across Eliza Hartwell's claim. The first gust struck the cabin hard enough to make the loose boards rattle against the frame. Canvas snapped. Dust lifted in wild circles around the yard. The horses tied near the trees tossed their heads and stamped at the ground. Eliza looked up at the unfinished roof and knew at once that the storm had chosen the one weakness she had not yet conquered. The ridge beam was set and most of the rafters were in place, but the final roof boards still lay stacked under canvas. If rain came hard before they were nailed down, the floor she had worked so carefully to seal would soak. The papers in the tin box would be safe if she kept them under her shawl, but the cabin itself would take damage. Days of work could swell, warp, and split by morning. Garrett was already moving. "We need the boards up now," he said. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter around herself. "I know. We have maybe an hour." "Then stop talking." He looked at her, and despite the dark sky, despite Cyrus Bellamy waiting in town, despite every danger crowding close, a brief warmth moved across his face. "Yes, ma'am." They worked fast. Garrett hauled the first board up the side ladder while Eliza steadied the lower brace. The wind fought them with every lift. It shoved at the wood, slipped under the edges, tried to tear it out of their hands. Eliza's skirts twisted around her ankles. Rain had not fallen yet, but the air smelled wet, sharp, and cold. She climbed after him with nails tucked into her apron pocket and the hammer gripped tight. Garrett looked down from the rafters. "You should stay below." Eliza raised one eyebrow. He took the warning without another word and shifted aside. That was why she trusted him more than she wanted to. Not because he never said the wrong thing, but because he learned quickly when he did. They laid the first board across the rafters. Garrett held it against the wind while Eliza drove the nails in with short, clean strikes. Her palms still carried old scars from the first week of building. The handle rubbed one open again, but she ignored the sting. Below them, the horses shifted and blew. Above them, thunder rolled closer. One board. Then another. Then another. The rhythm took over because rhythm was how hard things got done. Lift, place, hold, nail, breathe again. Garrett did not rush her. He matched her pace. When the wind knocked a board sideways, he caught it before it slid. When Eliza leaned too far to reach a nail, he braced the ladder with one boot and said nothing that sounded like worry. Worry would have made her angry. Silence made it possible for her to keep working. The first rain struck when half the roof was covered. Fat drops hit the boards, darkening the pine in spots. Then came more, quick and cold, tapping against Eliza's bonnet, running down Garrett's coat, turning dust to mud below. "We keep going," Eliza said before he could ask. Garrett nodded. "We keep going." Lightning flashed beyond the ridge. For one white second she saw him clearly, rain on his face, jaw set, shirt clinging to his shoulders, eyes fixed not on the storm but on the place where her hand shook as she reached for another nail. He saw too much. That was another danger. Cyrus had watched her to correct her. Garrett watched her to understand when the weight became too much. The difference should have comforted her. Instead, it made her heart tremble in a way the cold could not explain. The next gust hit hard. Eliza lost her footing. Her boot slipped on wet wood. The hammer dropped from her hand and clattered down the roof slope. For a breath, her body tipped backward toward the open side of the wall. Garrett caught her wrist. Not her waist, not her arm pulled hard against him. Just her wrist, firm enough to stop the fall, gentle enough not to claim more than the moment required. Eliza froze. His hand was warm despite the rain. "You have me," he said. The words were simple, spoken in the storm, not a promise of forever, not a confession, just the truth of that second. "You have me." Eliza looked at him, rain slipping over her lashes. For a heartbeat, all she could see was the man in front of her. Not the Vale name, not the ranch, not the gossip, not Rosalind Mercer's sorrow or Cyrus Bellamy's threats. Just Garrett holding her safe without pulling her closer than she allowed. Then she pulled her wrist free. Not sharply. Carefully. "I need my hammer," she said. Garrett climbed down and retrieved it without a word. By the time darkness settled, the roof was covered enough to survive the night. Not finished, not pretty, but covered. Rain slid down the rough boards instead of pouring through the rafters. The cabin groaned under the weather, yet held. Eliza stood inside the doorway, soaked through and shivering, one hand pressed to the curve of her belly. Garrett brought the horses beneath the trees, then returned with an armful of dry kindling wrapped in his coat. The coat was nearly soaked, but the center of the bundle was still usable. "You planned that," she said, teeth nearly chattering. "I hoped I would not need it." He crouched by the little iron stove she had set near the back wall and started the fire with careful hands. It took 3 tries. On the 4th, the flame caught, small and stubborn. Soon a thin warmth began to fill the cabin. Eliza sat on the crate near the wall. Her whole body ached now that the work had stopped. She hated that. Pain waited politely while she had no time for it, then entered the room like it owned the place. Garrett glanced at her. "You need dry clothes." "In the trunk." He stood, then stopped. "May I bring it closer?" The question nearly broke her. A man asking permission to move a trunk. A man who could have lifted the whole thing with one hand and never thought twice, yet waited because it was hers. "Yes," she said. He brought the trunk near the partition wall, then turned his back and busied himself with the stove while she changed behind the hanging canvas she used for privacy. The dry dress scratched against her damp skin, but it was warm enough. She wrapped her shawl around herself and returned to the fire. Garrett still had his back turned. "I am decent," she said. He faced her then, and the softness in his eyes made the cabin feel smaller. "You should eat. So should you." "I will." "You always say that like you mean later." One corner of his mouth lifted. "You notice too much." "I had to learn." The smile faded. He set a small pot on the stove and opened a cloth bundle from his saddlebag. Beans, salt pork, coffee, and 2 biscuits wrapped in paper. Eliza stared. "You brought supper." "I brought supplies for the ride tomorrow." "We are still riding tomorrow." "If the creek does not flood." "And if it does?" "Then we wait 1 day and take the East Trail." She watched him stir the pot. "You have decided a great deal." "No," he said. "I have planned a great deal, you decide." The fire cracked softly. Outside, rain beat against the roof they had fought to save. Every drop sounded like proof. The cabin was holding. The walls were holding. She was holding. But the place inside her that had stayed locked for so long was beginning to feel the strain. Garrett handed her a tin cup of coffee. His fingers brushed hers for the briefest moment. Not enough to call it an accident. Not enough to call it anything else. Eliza took the cup and looked down into it. "Rosalind came because she cares for you," she said. Garrett sat on the floor across from her, leaving space between them. "I know." "You hurt her." "Yes." "I do not want to be the woman another woman blames." "You are not." "She may not see it that way." "No," Garrett said, "she may not." Eliza looked at him then. "You do not defend yourself much." "I used to. It rarely changed the truth." That answer stayed with her. For a while they ate in silence. The stew was plain but warm. The biscuits were hard but welcome. Rain softened the world beyond the walls until Mercy Ridge felt far away, Cyrus felt far away, and the courthouse danger waiting ahead seemed like something from another life. Then Garrett reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper, damp around the edges. "I forgot this until now," he said. Eliza took it carefully. It was a note from his mother, Abigail Vale. The handwriting was strong and slanted. "Mr. Porter in Bozeman is known to me. If Eliza Hartwell seeks counsel, he will receive her. Tell her a woman who builds her own shelter has already answered more questions than most men know how to ask." Eliza read it twice. A strange ache opened in her chest. "Your mother wrote this." Garrett nodded. "I told her some of it." "Some?" "Only what was mine to tell. That you needed a lawyer, that you built the cabin, that Pike was talking." Eliza's thumb rested on the edge of the note. "She believes me." "She believes work, always has." Eliza looked toward the roof. Rain slid over it in steady sheets. No one in Mercy Ridge had believed her first. They had believed rumor, appearance, Cyrus's name before he even arrived. But Abigail Vale, a woman she had never met, had believed the evidence of her hands. That should not have mattered. It did. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Eliza a little longer. Because sometimes one woman's belief can give another woman the courage to face a whole town. The fire burned low. Garrett added another piece of wood. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm now, showing old scars and rain-darkened skin. Eliza watched the way he moved around her small home with care, never making himself too comfortable, never acting like his presence gave him rights. "You cannot stay here tonight," she said. He looked up. "I know. The storm is bad. I have slept in worse. There is no shelter outside except the trees." "I know." She frowned. "Do you enjoy making me feel unreasonable?" "No, ma'am. You are very irritating." This time he did smile. "I have been told." Eliza turned her face toward the fire before he could see the smile that almost answered his. The storm cracked hard overhead. The whole cabin shuddered. Instinctively, Eliza's hand went to her belly. Garrett saw. "Is she all right?" The question was quiet. Eliza did not correct the she. "Yes," she said after a moment, "she is moving." His face softened in a way that made her look away. "What did you say her name was?" "June." "June," he repeated, as if testing the name against the sound of rain and wood smoke. "That is a good name for a child born after hard weather." Eliza swallowed. For one dangerous second she imagined it, a baby in this cabin, morning light on the floor, Garrett's horse outside, a man's boots by the door, not because he owned the place but because he had been welcomed there. The image was so tender she had to push it away. "I am still married by law," she said. "I know. And I am not looking for a husband." "I know that too." "Then why do you look at me like that?" Garrett went still. The rain filled the silence. He looked at the fire, then back at her. "Because I have spent most of my life admiring land, cattle, strong horses, and good timber, things that hold under pressure." His voice lowered. "Then I met you." Eliza could not move. Garrett stood before the words could become too much. He reached for his hat. "I will sleep by the horses," he said. "At first light, if the creek is passable, we ride for Bozeman." He opened the door. Rain and wind rushed in, cold and wild. "Garrett." He stopped, looking back. Eliza held Abigail Vale's note in both hands. Her voice came softer than she intended. "Thank you for not making kindness feel like a trap." For a moment, the storm seemed to quiet around them. Garrett's eyes held hers. "Thank you for letting me stand close enough to learn how," he said. Then he stepped into the rain and closed the door behind him. Eliza stood alone in the warm, dim cabin, listening to the storm strike the roof they had built together. For the first time, she did not feel trapped by the sound of someone outside her door. She felt protected. And that frightened her so deeply that long after the fire burned low, she remained awake with one hand on the tin box, one hand on her belly, and Garrett Vale's words moving through her heart like thunder that had not yet passed. At first light, the storm had not fully passed, but it had tired itself. Rain still fell in thin silver lines from the cabin roof, and mist clung low between the pines. The yard was mud. The creek beyond the trees spoke louder than it had the day before, swollen from the night's downpour and rushing over stones with a force Eliza could hear even through the cabin walls. She opened the door just as Garrett was tightening his saddle. He stood beneath a dripping pine, his coat damp, his hat dark with rain, and his horse nosing at wet grass as if the night had been no hardship at all. Garrett looked tired, but not resentful. That mattered to Eliza. She had known men who turned every discomfort into a debt someone else had to pay. Garrett only looked up and said, "Morning." Eliza held a tin cup out to him. "Coffee." He stared at it for half a second, surprised enough that the careful calm left his face. Then he crossed the yard and took it. "Thank you." "It is terrible coffee," she said. "I have had worse." "You say that like a man trying to be polite." "I say it like a man who slept under a pine tree in a storm and would drink hot creek water if it came in a cup." Despite herself, Eliza smiled. It was small, barely there, but Garrett saw it. He did not point it out. That was wise of him. They drank standing near the doorway while the morning light slowly grew. Inside, the stove gave off a soft heat. The roof above them still dripped in two places, but most of the cabin was dry. Eliza looked at the floorboards, the walls, the door, the little square of window shining faintly through rain. The house had survived. So had she. Garrett followed her gaze. She held. Eliza nodded. She held. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cabin felt almost like a living thing between them, bruised by weather but standing proud. Then Garrett turned toward the creek. "I checked the crossing before you woke. Water is high but passable if we go slow." "You crossed already." "I checked from this side." "So you guessed." "I judged." "That is a rich man's word for guessed." His mouth twitched. "Then yes, I guessed carefully." Eliza shook her head, but the warmth of the fire had moved into her chest somehow, and she could not make her irritation sharp. She packed the tin box first. The deed, the letter from Cyrus, the lumber agreement, her father's estate papers, and Abigail Vale's note. Then she wrapped the box in oilcloth and placed it inside a satchel Garrett had brought from his saddle. It was stronger than hers and kept water better. "I will return it," she said. "I know. You say that too easily." "Because I trust you." The words landed quietly. Eliza looked down at the satchel buckles and said nothing. Trust was not a word she knew what to do with anymore. In Cyrus's house, trust had meant surrender. Trust had meant believing someone else knew better than she did. Trust had meant smiling while a man slowly took her life apart and called it care. But Garrett said it like a bridge, not a cage. That made it harder. They left the cabin just after sunrise. Garrett insisted on taking the heavier satchel, and Eliza refused twice before allowing it, only because he did not make the matter about her weakness. He simply said the horse could carry it better, and that was true enough to accept. The creek crossing was worse than Garrett had admitted. Water rushed brown and white over the stones, foaming around the horse's legs as they stepped in. Eliza's mare hesitated, ears flicking back. Eliza leaned forward and spoke low, steady words to the animal, the same way she spoke to herself when fear rose too high. "It is only water," she whispered. "We move through it one step at a time." Garrett entered first, leading his horse slow across the shallows. Then he turned in the saddle and waited. Not ahead, not too far, close enough to help, far enough to let her lead her own mount. Eliza guided the mare into the current. The first few steps held. Then a hidden stone shifted beneath the mare's hoof. The animal stumbled. Eliza gripped the reins as the world tilted. Cold spray struck her skirt. The mare recovered almost at once, but fear shot through Eliza so fast she gasped. Garrett was already beside her. He did not grab the reins. He placed his horse between hers and the strongest pull of the current, blocking the force with his own mount's body. "Easy," he said. "Let her find her feet." Eliza's fingers shook around the leather. "She has them," Garrett said. "So do you." They crossed. On the far bank, Eliza sat very still, breathing hard. She hated the fear, hated that Garrett had seen it, hated even more that he had known what to say. Garrett looked at the trail ahead. "We can rest." "No." "Eliza." "I said no." He turned toward her then, not angry, only firm. "Resting is not quitting." The word struck with such clean force that she had no answer. He dismounted first and loosened his horse's girth. Eliza wanted to refuse, wanted to keep moving, wanted to prove that no creek, no storm, no man from her past could slow her down. But the child shifted low and heavy, and a deep ache spread through her back. So she dismounted. Garrett built a small fire beneath an overhanging rock, while Eliza sat on a fallen log with her hands folded over her belly. The rain had stopped now, leaving the air washed and sharp. Far off, the Montana hills rose blue under broken clouds. Garrett handed her a biscuit from his saddlebag. She accepted it. "You are looking too satisfied," she said. "I am trying not to." "Because I rested. Because you chose sense over pride." Eliza narrowed her eyes. "Careful, Mr. Vale." "Yes, ma'am." But his eyes were warm. They rode for Bozeman after that, following the east trail through wet grass and pine-shadowed slopes. By mid-afternoon, the land opened into rolling country and the road grew busier. Freight wagons, a family heading west with pots clanking from the wagon's side, 2 miners with tired mules. Men looked at Eliza when they passed, then at Garrett, then looked away. She felt every glance. Garrett must have felt them too, but he said nothing until they reached a narrow ridge where the road dipped toward town. "Do you want me to ride ahead when we enter?" Eliza looked at him. "Why?" "So people do not make assumptions." "They already have." "I know." She studied his face. He was offering distance because he thought it might protect her. There was kindness in it, but it made a lonely ache open beneath her ribs. "No," she said, "ride beside me." Garrett's expression changed. "Only slightly." "But enough." "Beside you," he said. Bozeman rose before them in the late afternoon, muddy, noisy, alive with wagons and smoke. It was larger than Mercy Ridge, with brick storefronts, wooden boardwalks, and a main street crowded enough that Eliza felt suddenly aware of her patched dress, her swollen belly, and the mud at the hem of her skirt. Garrett guided them toward a narrow office near the courthouse. A painted sign hung over the door. "Elias Porter, attorney at law." Inside, the office smelled of ink, pipe tobacco, and wet wool. Books lined 2 walls. Papers sat in stacks that looked careless until Eliza noticed every stack was tied with string and labeled. Elias Porter was a thin man with sharp eyes and hair that refused to stay combed. He looked first at Garrett, and his face flattened. "Vale. Porter. If this is about the irrigation ruling, I already told your mother I will not apologize for winning." Garrett removed his hat. "It is not about water." Porter looked at Eliza then, and the annoyance left his face. Not because he softened exactly, but because he understood the room had changed. "Miss Hartwell?" he asked. "Yes." "Mrs. Vale wrote that you might come." Eliza blinked. "Mrs. Vale." "She sent a wire ahead." Porter pulled a paper from his desk. "Said a pregnant homesteader may arrive with her son and a case that needs urgent attention. She also said if I overcharged you, she would tell every ranch wife in Montana I cheat women in distress." Garrett looked down, hiding a smile. Eliza did not hide hers this time. "Your mother has confidence," she said. "She has practice," Garrett answered. Porter pointed to the chair. "Sit, Miss Hartwell. Tell me everything from the beginning and do not make it pretty. Pretty stories lose in court. True ones have bones." So Eliza told him. She told him about St. Louis, about Cyrus Bellamy, about the money from her father, about being sent away like an inconvenience, about leaving before dawn, filing the claim, buying tools, building walls, and receiving the letter. She spoke clearly. Sometimes her voice thinned. Once, when she described Cyrus calling the child a complication, Garrett's hand tightened around his hat so hard the brim bent. Porter noticed everything. He asked questions quickly but never cruelly. Dates, names, amounts, receipts, witnesses, filing papers, the condition of the cabin, the exact wording of Cyrus's threats. When Eliza handed him the tin box, he opened each paper with care. At last he sat back. "Bellamy will likely file in St. Louis or Helena if he has not already. He will claim abandonment. He may challenge your ability to remain on the homestead. He may argue the child must be born under his supervision." Eliza's stomach tightened. Can he win? Porter looked at her directly. He can make trouble. Trouble is not the same as victory. Garrett leaned forward. What does she need? Evidence, witnesses, a finished residence if possible, proof of funds, proof that she took what was hers, proof that she is not reckless, unstable, or hiding in unsuitable conditions. Porter tapped the tin box. "This is a good beginning." "A beginning," Eliza repeated. "Yes, you will also need testimony." Garrett straightened. "Mine." Porter gave him a dry look. "That may help or harm, depending on how loud the gossip becomes." Eliza looked between them. "What does that mean?" "It means Bellamy's lawyer will try to make Mr. Vale's presence look improper. If Garrett testifies, they will ask why he was at your cabin. How often? Alone, before sunrise, during storms." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Let them ask." Porter turned to him. "This is not a cattle auction, Mr. Vale. Truth alone does not always win. It must be presented in a way a judge is willing to hear." Eliza liked him for saying that. She understood it better than anyone. A woman could tell the truth with tears and be called unstable. She could tell it with anger and be called dangerous. She could tell it calmly and be called cold. Men wanted truth from women only after it had been dressed to their comfort. "What do we do?" she asked. Porter looked at her with approval, as if that was the right question. "You finish the cabin. You keep every receipt. You let the photographer in Mercy Ridge take pictures if you can manage it. You ask Mrs. Vale to visit your homestead." Garrett lifted his head. "My mother. She is respected. A woman's testimony may not carry enough weight alone in some rooms, but paired with records and photographs, it can make a story harder to twist." Eliza thought of Abigail Vale's note. A woman who builds her own shelter has already answered more questions than most men know how to ask. "Yes," she said, "I will ask her." Porter wrote something down. "And you must be ready for Bellamy to appear kind in public." "He always does." "Good, then you know his method." Porter looked up. "Do not meet him alone. Do not sign anything. Do not accept private settlement without counsel. Do not answer letters without showing me. And most importantly, do not let him make you angry in front of witnesses if you can help it." Eliza gave a small, tired laugh. Porter raised an eyebrow. "Something funny?" "No," she said, "just familiar. I have spent years learning how not to look angry when I had every right." The room went quiet. Garrett looked at her in a way that made her heart ache. Porter leaned back. "Then use what you learned, not because he was right to teach it, because you survived it and now it can serve you instead of him." Those words stayed with Eliza all through the ride back. They left Bozeman before dusk and lodged at a widow's boarding house Porter recommended, because the roads would be too dark and wet for a safe ride home. Eliza took one small room at the top of the stairs. Garrett took the stable loft without complaint. Before they separated for the night, Garrett handed her the satchel with the tin box inside. "I will be below if you need anything." Eliza held the satchel close. "I know." He turned to go. "Garrett." He stopped. She stood in the hallway lamplight, tired, muddy, and carrying more fear than she wanted him to see. "When you said I had you in the storm," she said quietly, "did you mean only then?" Garrett did not answer quickly. That was another thing she had come to trust. He did not use quick words for serious matters. Finally, he said, "I meant then because then was all I had the right to promise." Eliza's throat tightened. "And now?" she asked. His eyes held hers. "Now I am waiting for you to tell me what I have the right to promise." The hallway seemed to grow very still. A door closed somewhere downstairs. A woman laughed softly in the kitchen. Rain tapped against the window at the end of the hall. Eliza looked at Garrett Vale and felt the terrible sweetness of wanting something she had not built herself. "I do not know yet," she whispered. Garrett nodded. "Then I will wait." He went down the stairs. Eliza entered her room and closed the door, but she did not sleep for a long time. She sat by the window with the tin box on her lap and watched the rain slide down the glass. For years, Cyrus had demanded answers from her before she had found her own thoughts. Garrett had offered to wait. And somehow, that patience felt more dangerous than any demand. By morning, they would ride back to Mercy Ridge with a plan, a lawyer, and a small fragile hope. But Eliza did not yet know that Cyrus Bellamy had spent the same night in town making a plan of his own, and by the time she reached her cabin again, one piece of her carefully built world would already be missing. Eliza Hartwell knew something was wrong before she saw the open door. The ride back from Bozeman had taken most of the day. The roads were still soft from rain, and twice they had to slow where the wheels of freight wagons had cut deep scars into the mud. By the time her cabin came into view between the pines, evening was spreading gold across the valley, and the air smelled of wet earth, pine sap, and cold smoke from distant chimneys. For one brief moment, Eliza felt peace. The roof was still there. The south window caught the sunset. The walls stood firm against the slope. Her cabin looked small beneath the wide Montana sky, but it also looked brave, like something that had no business surviving and had done so anyway. Then Garrett's horse stopped. Eliza followed his gaze. The cabin door hung open. She had closed it. She knew she had. Before they left, she had checked the latch twice, then touched the frame with her fingertips the way some people touched a Bible before stepping into danger. Now the door stood half open, moving slightly in the wind. Garrett dismounted first. "Stay here." Eliza looked at him sharply. He caught himself at once. "Please." That single word softened the command into care, but it did not change her answer. "No." She slid down from her mare before he could argue, one hand braced against the saddle, the other pressed protectively beneath her belly. Garrett came beside her, his body tense, his eyes moving over the yard. There were tracks in the mud. 2 men, maybe 3. One horse tied near the woodpile. Wagon wheels had cut close to the doorway. Whoever had come had not been trying to hide. That was Cyrus's way. A hidden wrong could be denied. A public one became a message. Eliza walked toward the cabin with Garrett half a step behind her. He did not touch her. He did not move ahead. But she could feel him there, steady as a post in rough weather. Inside, the room looked almost the same. That made it worse. The stove was cold. The table stood where she left it. The quilt on the bedroll had been folded back, not thrown aside. The trunk was closed. Her dishes sat neatly on the shelf. Cyrus had always known how to make violence look like order. Eliza went straight to the corner near the partition wall. The tin box was gone. For a moment, she only stared at the empty space. Then she knelt too quickly, searching beneath the bedroll, behind the crate, under the folded canvas, though she already knew. Her breath grew short. The child moved sharply, and Eliza pressed one trembling hand to her side. Garrett's voice came low behind her. "Eliza." She kept searching. "Eliza. It was here. I know. It was right here." Garrett crouched near her, not too close. What was inside? The deed copy, my father's estate letter, Cyrus's letter, the lumber agreement, Mrs. Vale's note. Her voice shook for the first time. Everything. "Not everything," Garrett said. She looked at him. His face was pale with anger, but his voice stayed steady. "Porter made copies." Eliza froze. "In Bozeman," he said. "He copied the deed, the estate letter, and Cyrus's letter before we left. He kept them in his office." The room seemed to tilt back into place, one board at a time. Copies. Elias Porter had made copies. Eliza closed her eyes and let out a breath that nearly became a sob, but she stopped it before it broke free. She would not give Cyrus even a stolen sob inside the home she built. Garrett stood and looked around the room. "He wanted you to panic. He wanted me to know he could get inside." "He did." Eliza rose slowly. Her fear began turning into something cleaner. Anger. Not the wild kind, not the kind that ruined a woman in front of witnesses. This was the kind of anger that sharpened a blade before a hard winter. Calm, useful, patient. "He folded the quilt," she said. Garrett looked at her. He searched the room and folded the quilt back. She looked at the bedroll, then the neat shelf, then the door. "He wanted me to see his manners. He wanted me to know he had been here and still call himself civilized." Garrett's hands curled at his sides. Eliza turned toward him. "Do not look like that." "Like what?" "Like you want to break something." "I do." "You cannot, that is what he wants." Garrett breathed in slowly, then out. The effort showed. "You know him well," he said. "I survived him." Those 3 words filled the cabin more fully than any fire. Outside, a horse came up the trail. Garrett moved to the doorway. Eliza followed. It was Amos Reed on his mule again, coming fast, hat nearly flying off his head. His face was flushed and frightened. "Miss Hartwell," he called before he reached the yard. "I came soon as Ma stopped watching." Eliza stepped out. "Amos, did you see who came here?" He nodded hard. "Mr. Bellamy, Mr. Pike and one other man, a tall one with spectacles. They had a paper. Mr. Pike said they had legal right to inspect the property." Garrett's voice turned cold. "They did not." Amos swallowed. "I hid by the creek. I seen them go in. They carried out a little box." Eliza's eyes closed briefly. Garrett looked toward town. "How long ago?" "Couple hours, maybe." "Did they say anything?" Amos nodded, but his eyes went to Eliza with worry. "Mr. Bellamy said if Miss Hartwell wanted her things, she could come to the hotel and collect them like a sensible wife." The words landed hard, but Eliza did not flinch. Cyrus was building a stage now. He wanted her to walk into town desperate, angry, frightened, begging for what he had stolen. Then he would have witnesses. Then he would say, "See how unstable she is. See how she behaves." Eliza looked at the cabin, then at the deepening evening. "No," she said. Garrett turned to her. "No. I am not going to the hotel." "Eliza, the original papers." "Our bait." He said nothing, because he knew she was right. Amos slipped off his mule and held out something small, wrapped in a dirty cloth. "He dropped this near the door. I found it after they left." Eliza took the cloth and unfolded it. Inside lay Abigail Vale's note. Not the deed, not the estate paper, not Cyrus's letter. Only the note. A woman who builds her own shelter has already answered more questions than most men know how to ask. Eliza stared at it. Why had Cyrus left that behind? Had he dropped it by mistake? Or had he read it and decided a woman's words were not evidence enough to steal? Garrett's voice was rough. My mother's note. Eliza folded it carefully and held it against her chest. He left the wrong thing. Garrett looked at her. He thought the legal papers were my strength, she said. They matter, but this. She looked at the cabin around her, then at the note. This reminds me I am not the only woman who knows what work means. Amos shifted from one foot to the other. What are you gonna do? Eliza looked at the boy, then at Garrett. I am going to finish my house. The answer seemed to surprise both of them. Garrett stepped closer. Tonight. Yes. After all this. Because of all this. The light was fading, but Eliza moved with purpose. She rehung the latch first, checking for damage. Then she took a charcoal pencil and marked the inside of the door where the forced edge had splintered. Evidence, Porter had said, keep evidence. Let truth have bones. Garrett understood without being told. He found a scrap board and wrote down what Amos had seen, then had the boy repeat the time, the men, the wagon, and the stolen box. Amos printed his name beneath the statement with careful, childish letters. Eliza watched him sign and felt something steady beneath her ribs. Cyrus had tried to show her she was alone. Instead, a boy had become a witness. Garrett rode Amos halfway back to the creek before returning. By then, Eliza had lit the stove and was fitting a crossbar inside the door. It was a simple piece of oak that could slide into 2 brackets, stronger than the latch, strong enough to hold against a man who thought paper made him welcome. Garrett stood in the doorway. That is good work. She kept her eyes on the brackets. It will hold. Yes. He came inside and set down his tool roll. May I cut the second bracket? Eliza looked at him. Yes. They worked in silence as night gathered. This silence was different from the earlier ones. It carried fear, anger, and something else neither of them named. A shared understanding that the world outside that cabin had drawn a line, and they were standing on the same side of it. When the crossbar was finished, Eliza slid it into place. The sound was deep and solid. Garrett looked at the door. He will not like that. Good. That made him smile for half a second. Eliza turned toward the stove, but a sudden pain tightened low across her belly. Not sharp, not lasting, but strong enough that her breath caught. Garrett was beside her at once, stopping just short of touching. What is it? She held up one hand. Wait. The pain passed. Then the child moved, a rolling pressure beneath her palm. Eliza exhaled slowly. I am all right. Garrett did not look convinced. She moved, Eliza said. That is all. The worry in his face changed then, becoming softer, deeper. June, he said. Eliza looked at him. He had not asked permission to use the name, yet somehow it did not feel like theft. Yes, she said, June. They stood close in the dim cabin, firelight flickering over the walls, rainwater still dripping from the roof edge outside. Garrett's hands hung at his sides like he was holding himself back by sheer will. Eliza, he said quietly, I need to tell you something before court, before Bellamy twists it, before anyone else gets to say it first. Her heart tightened. What? He looked away toward the window, where night had turned the glass dark. My family did want me to marry Rosalind. That was true, but there is more. He drew a slow breath. 3 years ago I nearly did, not because I loved her, because my mother was ill, my foreman had left, my brother was gone, and every person around me kept saying the ranch needed certainty. I let them speak for me until Rosalind believed I had chosen her. Eliza stayed still. I did not choose, he said. That was my wrong. I let silence do harm because I was too tired to fight everyone's expectations. His voice lowered. And when I met you, I saw someone who had been given every reason to surrender and still chose, board by board, nail by nail. You made me ashamed of all the years I called duty the same thing as courage." Eliza's eyes burned. Garrett looked back at her. "I admire your strength," he said, "but that is not all I feel, and I will not pretend otherwise just because it would be easier." The cabin went quiet except for the stove. Eliza's whole life seemed to narrow to the space between them. She wanted to step back. She wanted to tell him admiration was dangerous, that feelings were worse, that she could not carry his heart along with her legal fight and winter and a child who needed every part of her strength. But she also wanted, with a longing that frightened her, to believe a man could speak a feeling without turning it into a demand. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Garrett's answer came without hesitation. "Nothing you are not ready to give." The tears came then. Only two, silent and quick. Eliza turned her face, but Garrett had seen. He did not move toward her. He did not use her tears as permission. That was what made them harder to stop. "I do not know how to be loved without being managed," she said. Garrett's face changed, as if the words had hurt him physically. "Then I will not manage you." "You say that now." "I will say it as long as it needs saying, and prove it longer than that." She looked at him through the firelight. No one had ever offered proof as patiently as promise. Before she could answer, another sound came from outside. A wagon. Slow this time. Not Cyrus, not Pike. Garrett moved to the window and looked out. His expression shifted in surprise. "What is it?" Eliza asked. He opened the door and stepped onto the threshold. A covered buggy had stopped near the yard. A woman climbed down carefully, tall and silver-haired, wearing a dark traveling coat and gloves damp from the road. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime making hard things look possible. Garrett removed his hat. "Mother." Abigail Vale looked past her son to Eliza standing in the cabin doorway. "I heard Cyrus Bellamy came onto your property while you were away," she said. "So I came to see the home he thought he could frighten you out of." Eliza stepped forward slowly. Abigail's eyes moved over her face, then to her belly, then to the roof, the walls, the crossbar, the south window, and the fresh mud on the floor. At last she smiled faintly. "Well," Abigail said, "I can see why he is scared." And for the first time in many weeks, Eliza Hartwell laughed. Abigail Vale entered Eliza Hartwell's cabin without making it feel invaded. That was the first thing Eliza noticed. Most people stepped into another person's unfinished home and immediately looked for what was missing. Curtains, proper chairs, smooth walls, a polished stove, signs that life had already been made comfortable enough for judgment. Abigail did not do that. She removed her gloves at the doorway, brushed a little rain from her sleeve, and looked around with the eyes of a woman who understood work before appearance. Her gaze went to the roof boards first, then the braces, then the crossbar on the door, then the little stove, then the south window catching the last trace of evening light. "Your ridge line sits true," Abigail said. Eliza had expected pity, maybe concern. Perhaps one of those polite phrases wealthy women used when they did not want their discomfort to show. She had not expected that. "Thank you," Eliza said. "I mean it. I have seen hired crews leave worse work standing on ranch buildings and demand full pay for it." Garrett stood near the doorway, watching his mother with a look Eliza could not read. There was affection in it, but caution too, as if Abigail Vale had a way of moving through a room that could uncover truths before anyone was ready. Abigail turned to him. "Garrett, take my driver to the creek crossing and make sure nobody followed us from town." Garrett straightened. "Mother." "Do not mother me with that tone. I am speaking to Miss Hartwell." Eliza glanced at him. Garrett looked like a man caught between worry and obedience learned long ago. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then he looked at her, silently asking whether she was comfortable being left with Abigail. That small question in his eyes warmed something in her. "I am all right," Eliza said. Garrett nodded once, took his hat, and stepped back into the darkening yard. When the door closed, the cabin grew quiet except for the fire. Abigail looked at Eliza for a long moment, not rudely, not softly either. She seemed to be weighing not whether Eliza deserved respect, but how much truth the room could hold. "You are frightened," Abigail said. Eliza's chin lifted. "I am prepared." That is not the opposite of frightened. The answer touched too close. Eliza moved to the stove and adjusted a piece of wood, though it did not need adjusting. "I have had many visitors today with opinions about my life." "I did not come to give you an opinion." "Then why did you come?" Abigail folded her gloves and set them on the table Eliza had built. "Because Cyrus Bellamy came into my town today and spoke your name like a man holding a receipt." Then Silas Pike repeated it as if shame were Sunday news. "I have heard that tone before. I did not like it then, and I do not like it now." Eliza looked back at her. Abigail's face had grown still, but her eyes held old weather. "My husband was not cruel," Abigail said. "I want that understood. He was a good man in many ways, but after he died I learned how quickly men who called themselves his friends decided my grief made me incapable. They offered to manage the ranch, then the accounts, then the men, then the house. Every offer came with concern on its face and ownership hidden beneath." Eliza said nothing. She knew better than to interrupt a woman, opening an old wound with dignity. "I learned," Abigail continued, "that if a woman does not hold her ground early, people will mistake her patience for permission. So I held it, not gently, not prettily, but I held it." She looked at the cabin walls. "You are doing the same." Eliza's throat tightened. "I am trying." "No, you are doing. Trying is what people say when they want room to fail. You have built a shelter in spite of weather, gossip, pregnancy, and a husband who sounds like he could make a prison out of good manners. That is not trying. That is doing." The words struck harder than Eliza expected. For months she had kept herself alive by refusing to ask for praise. Praise was not food. Praise was not a roof. Praise was not legal protection. Yet to hear another woman name her work plainly, without sweetness or suspicion, made her feel suddenly tired in a way she had not allowed herself to be. She lowered herself into the chair near the table. Abigail noticed but did not fuss. That made Eliza like her. "I cannot go back," Eliza said quietly. "I know. If the court says I must." "The court has not said it yet. If Cyrus convinces them I am unsafe, then we will make it very difficult for him to do so." Eliza looked up. "We." Abigail sat across from her. "Yes, we." The firelight moved across the older woman's face, showing lines earned by sun, loss, and command. She did not look like a woman who offered lightly. "Mr. Porter said your testimony might help," Eliza said. "Elias Porter is an unpleasant man with a useful mind. If he says it will help, it likely will." "Would you do that?" "I came prepared to." Abigail opened the small leather bag at her side and withdrew a folded paper. "I have written a statement describing what I saw tonight. Your structure, your supplies, your heat source, your door security, your condition as I observed it, and the fact that I found you calm and in possession of your faculties after a trespass that would have made most men shout for a pistol." Eliza took the paper slowly. The handwriting was strong, like the note she had saved from the mud. "I do not know how to thank you," Eliza said. "Do not thank me by shrinking. That is all I ask." Eliza looked at her. Abigail leaned forward slightly. "There will be a day in court when Cyrus Bellamy says something meant to make you smaller. He will say it politely. Men like that usually do. He will count on you breaking shape in front of strangers. Do not give him the satisfaction. Sit straight. Speak clearly. Make him explain himself in daylight." Eliza held the paper tighter. Those words felt like a hand at her back. Not pushing. Steadying. Outside, Garrett's voice sounded faintly near the horses. He was speaking to the driver, low and calm. Abigail's gaze moved toward the door. "My son cares for you," she said. Eliza's breath caught despite herself. Abigail did not smile. "I did not say that to corner you. I said it because people will soon say it with uglier intent, and I would rather the truth enter the room cleanly first." Eliza looked down at the table. "He told me." Good. Garrett has spent too much of his life letting silence stand where courage should have. The honesty surprised Eliza. "You speak plainly of him." "I love him. That does not require blindness." Eliza's fingers traced a mark in the table's wood. "I cannot promise him anything." "I did not ask if you could." "Others will." "Others are not in this cabin." Eliza looked back at her. Abigail's voice softened, though only slightly. "You are carrying a child, fighting a husband, building a home, and learning how to breathe without someone else's permission. That is enough for one woman's shoulders. If Garrett is worth anything, he will understand that loving you does not mean demanding a place in the center of your storm." The words settled into Eliza so deeply she nearly closed her eyes. "Loving you." No one had said it that directly. Garrett had come close, but even he had stopped at the edge, careful not to step where she had not opened the gate. Abigail stood then and moved toward the south window. She looked out at the dark yard, the wet trees, the horses beyond. "I will return tomorrow with a photographer," she said. "Not the one from Pike's Circle. I know a woman in Willow Bend who takes family portraits and land records. She can be discreet and accurate." A woman photographer. Mrs. Lottie Green, widowed twice, cheated once, and sharper than either man who underestimated her. A laugh escaped Eliza before she could stop it. Abigail looked pleased. "Good," she said. "You will need that laugh later, save some of it." Garrett returned a few minutes after, bringing cold air with him. His eyes went first to Eliza, checking silently. "She has not fainted, cried, or begged for rescue," Abigail said dryly. "You may stop looking like a worried barn dog." Garrett closed the door. "I was not." "You were." Eliza turned her face toward the fire to hide her smile. Garrett saw it anyway, and something gentle moved through his expression. Abigail put her gloves back on. "No one followed us. The trail is clear. My driver and I will go back before Pike invents a story about me spending the night in Scandal 2. Garrett stepped forward. "It is dark." "I have ridden in darker." "Mother." "Garrett," Abigail's voice quieted. "Stay here until the lantern burns halfway. Then ride home. If Bellamy sends anyone else tonight, Miss Hartwell should not be made to answer the door alone." Eliza looked at Abigail. "I can answer my own door." "I know," Abigail said, "but sometimes a witness at the door changes the way cowards knock." That was hard to argue with. At the threshold, Abigail paused and turned back to Eliza. "One more thing. When that child comes, if you need a woman who knows what she is doing, send for me." Eliza's hands went still. The offer was not legal, not strategic, not about Cyrus or Garrett or reputation. It was simply woman to woman. "A child is coming. You should not have to be alone." Eliza swallowed. "I will remember." Abigail nodded, then stepped into the night. Garrett walked his mother to the buggy and spoke with her quietly. Eliza could not hear the words. She watched them through the window, mother and son standing close beneath the dark pines, two figures shaped by the same land and different griefs. When Garrett came back inside, the cabin felt warmer and more dangerous all at once. He removed his hat and stood near the door. "She likes you." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Does she?" "She insulted Pike twice and offered to attend your child's birth. For my mother, that is nearly a declaration of devotion." Eliza smiled softly, then looked at the statement Abigail had left. "She is strong." Yes, she made you strong too. Garrett was quiet. The fire cracked between them. At times, he said, I think she tried. At times, I think I mistook comfort for duty and let her strength do the choosing for me. Eliza looked at him carefully, and now I am learning the difference. The answer carried no pride, only truth. That was becoming the hardest thing about Garrett Vale. Not his kindness, not his steady hands, not the way he stood beside her instead of in front of her. It was the way he kept telling the truth even when it did not make him look noble. Eliza folded Abigail's statement and placed it beneath the floorboard near the stove. Garrett watched but did not ask where she had hidden it. Good. She would have refused to tell him. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the lantern burned low. They worked for another hour, not because they had to, but because both needed somewhere to put the weight of the day. Garrett helped reinforce the inside brace of the door. Eliza sorted receipts, copied dates into her building book, and wrote Amos's witness account in cleaner handwriting. At last, the lantern flame reached the halfway mark. Garrett noticed. So did Eliza. He began gathering his tools. She wanted to say stay until morning. The thought startled her so badly that she almost dropped the pencil. Not because of impropriety, not because of gossip, because for one moment she wanted his nearness more than she wanted her own rules. That was the most frightening thing yet. Garrett tied his tool roll and lifted his coat. I will be here at first light with my mother and Mrs. Green, he said. If anything happens before then, bar the door and use the horn I left by the window. Eliza glanced at the small brass cattle horn on the sill. When did you leave that? While you were speaking with my mother. You placed it without asking. Garrett paused. A very small silence opened. Eliza waited. You are right, he said. I should have asked. He walked to the window, picked up the horn, and held it out to her. May I leave this here in case you need to call for help? Eliza looked at the horn in his hand. It would have been easy to say no just to prove the point, but that would have been pride, not freedom. Freedom was not refusing every hand. Freedom was choosing which hand to accept. Yes, she said. He placed it back on the sill. Thank you, she added. He turned toward her and the soft look in his eyes returned. For what? For learning. Garrett stood very still. Then he gave a small nod, as if those two words had mattered more than praise. He opened the door. Cold night air swept in. Before he stepped out, Eliza spoke his name. Garrett. He turned. She crossed the cabin slowly and stopped an arm's length from him. The firelight touched one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. He looked tired, steady, and more dear to her than she had allowed herself to admit. I am not ready, she said. His voice was gentle, I know. But I am not untouched by you. The words left her mouth before fear could drag them back. Garrett's expression changed. Not triumph, not hunger, not the satisfaction of a man hearing what he wanted. Wonder. That was worse, better, terrifying. Eliza continued, because courage had carried her this far and might as well carry her one sentence more. I do not know what to do with that yet. Garrett looked at her, as if she had placed something precious in his hands. Then we will not do anything with it tonight, he said. We will let it be true and ask nothing more of it. Eliza's eyes stung. He put on his hat and stepped into the yard. This time, after he closed the door, Eliza slid the crossbar into place and leaned her forehead against the wood. Not because she was keeping Garrett out. Because for the first time in years, she trusted someone enough to lock the door without feeling alone behind it. Tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Garrett after this, or would Eliza be right to guard her heart a little longer? Morning came clear and cold. Mrs. Lottie Green arrived with Abigail Vale and Garrett just after sunrise. She was short, round-faced, and brisk, with a camera packed in a polished wooden case and a voice that allowed no argument. "Stand in the doorway," she told Eliza. "Hand on the frame. No, not like a widow at a funeral, like the woman who built it." Eliza did as told. Garrett stood beside the south wall, outside the frame, holding a board in place for the interior photograph. Abigail insisted on being photographed near the stove as a witness to the living condition. Lottie took plates of the roof, the floor, the creek path, the stored food, the door crossbar, and the building book laid open on the table. When she was finished, she packed her camera and looked at Eliza. "That man at the hotel says this place is unfit," Lottie said. "He is either blind or hoping the judge is." Eliza almost laughed again. The sound died when another rider appeared on the trail. "Not Cyrus." A young deputy from Mercy Ridge rode into the yard, holding a folded document. Garrett moved first, then stopped himself. Eliza stepped forward. The deputy removed his hat, uncomfortable under Abigail's sharp gaze. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I have a notice from the county office." Eliza took the paper. Her eyes moved over the words once, then again. The air seemed to leave the morning. Garrett stepped closer. "What is it?" Eliza looked up slowly. "Cyrus has filed an emergency petition," she said. "There is a hearing in 3 days." Garrett's face hardened. Abigail took the paper and read fast. Eliza's voice stayed calm, but everyone there heard the fear beneath it. "He is asking the court to remove me from the property until the child is born." The cabin stood behind her in the clean morning light. Finished enough to prove itself. Strong enough to stand against storm. But now the fight had moved from timber, and whether to a room where men in coats would decide whether Eliza Hartwell belonged in the home she had built. And 3 days was all she had left. 3 days can feel like nothing to a person waiting for joy. To Eliza Hartwell, those 3 days felt like a narrow bridge over deep water, and every step across it had to be taken with care. The emergency petition changed the air around the cabin. Even the morning light seemed sharper after the deputy left, as if the whole world had leaned closer to see whether the woman who built her own shelter would be allowed to keep standing inside it. Garrett read the notice twice. Abigail read it once, and folded it with such clean anger that the paper made a hard sound in her hands. Mrs. Lottie Green, who had packed her camera but not yet left, gave a short snort. "Emergency," he calls it. Men do love calling a woman's freedom an emergency. Eliza almost smiled, but the fear beneath her ribs was too heavy. The petition said Cyrus Bellamy was requesting temporary authority to remove his wife from what he called an unsafe, remote, and socially improper dwelling until the child's birth. It claimed she was living without suitable protection, medical care, or respectable female supervision. It said her association with Garrett Vale had caused public concern. It said the child's welfare required immediate intervention. Every sentence was dressed in concern. Every sentence had Cyrus's hand around its throat. Garrett looked up from the paper. "We ride to Bozeman now." "No," Abigail said. He turned. "Mother." Eliza does not ride exhausted into court panic. That is what Bellamy wants. We send a wire to Porter, then we prepare. Eliza looked at Abigail. "Can we answer this in 3 days?" "We can do a great deal in 3 days," Abigail said. "A ranch woman learns that when snow is coming and the hay is still uncovered." Lottie lifted her camera case. "My plates will be ready by tomorrow evening if I work through the night." Garrett looked at her. "Can you do that?" "I have buried 2 husbands and raised 4 sons. Do not ask me if I can stay awake." Abigail nodded. "Good. I will send a rider to Porter with the notice and a wire from Mercy Ridge. Garrett, you ride to the county clerk and get a certified copy of Eliza's claim filing." "I already have one," Eliza said. Then get another. Men in court trust paper more when it has fresh ink and a seal pressed hard enough to bruise. Lottie chuckled. That is the truth. Eliza stood in the yard with all of them moving around her, planning, deciding, bracing the world before it could fall on her. For one old, painful second, panic rose because decisions were being made too quickly, and she had spent years being managed by people who called it help. Garrett saw her face change. He raised one hand, and everyone quieted. Eliza, he said, your call. Abigail stopped speaking. Lottie stopped closing her camera straps. Even the deputy, still awkward near his horse, looked down at his boots. Eliza breathed. Her call. The words settled her more than any comfort could have done. She took the petition from Abigail and read the first line again. Then she looked at the cabin, the creek trail, the roof boards, the door with its new crossbar, the marks where Cyrus had forced his way inside. All right, she said, we answer, but we answer my way. Garrett nodded. Tell us. We do not make this about Cyrus first. That is what he wants. He wants the court looking at my marriage, my leaving, my temper, my reputation. We make this about the home, my claim, my records, my supplies, my plans for the child. I will not stand there as a runaway wife. I will stand there as a homesteader. Abigail's eyes warmed. Good. Eliza turned to Lottie. The photographs must show the stove, the food stores, the creek path, the bed area, the door, and the roof. Not just that the cabin is pretty, that it works. It will, Lottie said. To the court clerk, Eliza continued, looking at Garrett. Get the fresh copy. Also ask whether Cyrus filed any supporting statements from Mercy Ridge. Garrett's expression darkened. Pike. Likely, I need to know what he said before he says it in court. I will find out. Eliza looked at Abigail. If you still mean to testify, tell them what you saw, not that you pity me, not that Garrett cares for me, just the home, the condition, the facts. Abigail gave a small approving nod. You understand courts better than many lawyers. I understand men who hide control inside concern. No one answered that. They all heard the truth in it. By noon, the cabin yard had become a quiet sort of command post. Garrett rode to Mercy Ridge. Abigail sent her driver with a wire for Elias Porter. Lottie left for Willow Bend with the photographic plates wrapped like holy relics. The deputy, visibly relieved not to be trapped beneath Abigail's stare any longer, returned to town. Eliza stayed behind. For the first time since Cyrus had arrived, she was alone again. She expected fear to rush in. Instead, she found herself cleaning. She swept mud from the floor. She folded the quilt. She stacked the small dishes on the shelf. She sorted the remaining receipts and rewrote dates in her building book with a steady hand. She checked the stove pipe, counted jars of beans and flour, and arranged the baby things in the small crate near the partition wall. There were not many. 2 folded cloths. A small white gown she had sewn from one of her old night dresses. A wooden rattle her father had carved years ago for a neighbor's child and never given away. Eliza picked up the rattle and sat at the table. It fit in her palm like a memory. Her father had been a carpenter, not famous, not wealthy, just a quiet man who believed wood had to be listened to before it could be shaped. When Eliza was little, he let her hold nails between her fingers and told her the first lesson of building was not strength. It is patience, he had said. Wood remembers being forced. She had not understood then. Now she did. People remembered being forced too. She pressed the rattle gently against her belly. June, she whispered, whatever happens in that courtroom, I need you to know something. You were not built out of fear. You were carried through fear, but you were not made from it. The baby shifted. Eliza closed her eyes. That evening, Garrett returned with the certified filing, 2 statements, and a face that told her the news was not all good. He found her by the woodpile, splitting small pieces for the stove. He dismounted and waited until she set the axe down. "Tell me," she said. Pike signed a statement. "I expected that." So did his wife. "I expected that too." Garrett took a folded paper from his coat. Rosalind Mercer also gave one. Eliza stilled. Garrett saw the hurt before she could hide it. "What did she say?" Eliza asked. "That she came here and found you alone with me at your cabin." Eliza took the paper and read the copied statement. Rosalind had not lied, not exactly. That made it sharper. She said she visited Eliza's claim after hearing concerning rumors. She said Garrett had been spending time there. She said Eliza appeared proud, guarded, and unwilling to acknowledge the social danger of the arrangement. She said Garrett had later informed her he would not pursue the understanding their families expected. It was not cruel, but it was useful to Cyrus. Eliza folded the paper. "She is angry." "Yes." "And hurt." "Yes." Eliza looked toward the dark trail. "I understand why." Garrett stepped closer, then stopped. "Her pain is not your responsibility." "No," Eliza said softly, "but pain does not need to be my responsibility to matter." Garrett had no answer for that. The next day, Abigail arrived before breakfast. She brought eggs, butter, coffee, 2 blankets, and a doctor. Eliza stood in the doorway and stared at the gray-bearded man beside Abigail's buggy. "No." Abigail lifted a hand. "Hear me first. No doctor examines me for court. He is not here for court unless you choose it. Dr. Milo Hensley delivered Garrett and his brother. He has also been thrown out of my house twice for giving advice I did not request, so I can confirm he is capable of surviving refusal." The doctor removed his hat with a tired smile. "Mrs. Vale remains my most difficult patient." "I remain alive," Abigail said, "which proves I was right." Eliza almost laughed despite herself. Garrett, who had ridden behind them, stayed near the horses, saying nothing. He knew this choice could not come from him. Dr. Hensley looked at Eliza kindly but not softly. "Miss Hartwell, I can examine you if you permit it. I can also simply ask questions from the porch and leave. You owe me nothing either way." "That word again." "Permit." Eliza looked from him to Abigail to Garrett. Then she stepped aside. "Questions first." Dr. Hensley nodded. "That is sensible." Questions became an examination only after Eliza agreed. Abigail stayed in the room at Eliza's request. Garrett waited outside by the horses the whole time, his back turned to the cabin like a sentry who knew the difference between guarding and watching. When Dr. Hensley finished, he washed his hands and wrote a note at Eliza's table. "You are tired," he said. "That is not a medical discovery." "No, but it is the foundation of many of them." He looked over his spectacles. "The child's heartbeat is strong. Your condition is stable. You need more rest, more food, and fewer men making themselves your emergency." Abigail smiled with satisfaction. Eliza sat very still. "Strong heartbeat. Stable." For the first time since Cyrus filed his petition, something loosened inside her. Dr. Hensley signed the note. "I will testify if called. I will not say you should be alone in a snowstorm, because no one should. I will say this cabin is warmer and cleaner than half the houses I visit with husbands standing useless by the stove." Eliza covered her mouth with one hand. It was not quite laughter, not quite crying. Maybe both. When Garrett came in later and heard the report, relief moved across his face so openly that Eliza had to look away. That afternoon they worked on the final evidence list. Abigail's statement, Dr. Hensley's statement, Amos Reed's account, Lottie's photographs, certified claim papers, receipts, building notes, Cyrus's letter copy from Porter's office, the marked damage on the door, the stolen box report. Piece by piece, the truth got its bones. Near sunset, a rider came from Bozeman with Porter's reply. Garrett read it aloud while Eliza sat at the table. Emergency hearing confirmed. Judge Alden Marwick presiding in Mercy Ridge Courthouse. Bellamy seeks temporary removal. We contest jurisdiction, fitness claims, and factual basis. Bring witnesses. Bring photographs. Bring yourself steady. Eliza looked up at the last line. Bring yourself steady. She folded her hands over the table. I can do that, she said. But that night, after Abigail left and Garrett prepared to ride back to his ranch, Eliza stepped outside with him under a sky full of cold stars. The cabin glowed behind them, lantern light in the window, smoke rising from the pipe. It looked like home now. Not finished, not grand, but alive. Garrett held his hat in both hands. Tomorrow will be hard. Yes. He will try to shame you. I know. He may speak of me. He will. I am sorry. Eliza looked at him. For what? For giving him a weapon. She shook her head. You did not give him one. He stole whatever he could reach. Men like Cyrus do not need truth to make a weapon. They only need an audience. Garrett's gaze held hers. The space between them felt very small. Eliza, he said, I will say only what you want me to say tomorrow. No. He looked confused. You will say the truth, she said. Not less because of me, not more because of me, just the truth. His eyes softened. All right. She looked at his hands, strong and still around his hat brim. Then she made the bravest choice of the day. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Garrett did not move. His breath changed, but he stayed still, letting her decide the shape of the moment. Eliza's fingers were rough from work. His were warm despite the night cold. It was not a kiss. It was not a promise. It was only her hand on his, but to Eliza it felt like opening a window in a room that had been locked for years. I'm afraid, she said. Garrett's voice was low. I know. I do not want him to see it. Then look at me when he tries. She lifted her eyes. Garrett swallowed. Not because I can save you, because I will remember the truth when he tries to make you forget it. The tears rose, but this time she did not turn away. If you believe love should stand beside a person without taking over their life, stay with this story until the end, because tomorrow Eliza will learn whether truth is strong enough to protect the home her hands have built. Garrett left after that. Eliza stood in the yard until his horse disappeared into the dark. The next morning came clear, cold, and bright. Mercy Ridge seemed to have gathered the whole valley for the hearing. Wagons lined the courthouse street. Women stood under parasols, though the sun was mild. Men leaned near hitching posts, speaking low and turning when Eliza arrived. She wore her cleanest dress, dark blue, mended at the cuff. Her hair was pinned simply. Abigail walked on one side of her. Garrett walked on the other, not touching her, not shielding her, only matching her steps. Lottie carried the photographs. Dr. Hensley carried his medical bag. Amos Reed stood near the courthouse steps with his mother, pale but determined. Cyrus Bellamy waited by the door in a fine black suit. He smiled when he saw her. Eliza, he said softly for everyone nearby to hear, there is still time to avoid this. Eliza stopped in front of him. For one heartbeat, she saw the old parlor, the polished table, the voice that corrected her until she forgot the sound of her own. Then she saw the cabin, the roof, the door, the south window, Garrett's hand beneath hers in the cold. No, she said clearly, there is not. She walked past him into the courthouse. The hearing room smelled of dust, paper, and old varnish. Judge Marwick sat high at the front, gray-haired and stern. Porter was already there, his papers arranged in neat stacks. Cyrus's lawyer began first. He spoke beautifully. That was the danger. He spoke of concern, safety, propriety, marital duty, and the unborn child's welfare. He painted Eliza as fragile when it suited him and reckless when fragility was not enough. He spoke of isolation, scandal, unstable choices, and improper male company. He said no decent court could leave a woman in her condition in such circumstances. Eliza sat still, hands folded, face calm. Then Cyrus testified. He looked wounded, patient, reasonable. He said he only wanted his wife safe. He said he had offered private resolution. He said Eliza had been misled by pride and by people who did not understand the sanctity of marriage. He said she had always been emotional, though he had tried to guide her gently. At that word guide, Eliza felt her fingers tighten. Garrett shifted behind her. She did not look back. She breathed. Porter rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Bellamy," he said, "have you personally seen Miss Hartwell's cabin since filing this petition?" Cyrus smiled faintly. "Yes." "Did you enter with her permission?" The room quieted. Cyrus paused. "I entered as her husband." "That was not my question." The first crack appeared. "No," Cyrus said, "not with direct permission." "Did you remove a tin box containing personal and legal papers?" Cyrus's lawyer stood. "Objection." Porter did not blink. Goes directly to conduct and credibility. Judge Marwick leaned forward. "Answer." Cyrus's jaw tightened. "I secured documents relevant to my wife's welfare." "You stole them." "I protected them." "From whom?" Cyrus did not answer. Porter let the silence work. Then came the witnesses. Pike spoke first and tried to sound righteous. Porter asked how much Cyrus had paid for his hotel room, meals, and guide service. Pike stumbled. Mrs. Pike spoke of reputation. Porter asked whether she had ever visited Eliza's cabin. She had not. Rosalind Mercer came next. Eliza's heart tightened when she entered. Rosalind looked pale, proud, and deeply unhappy. She did not look at Garrett. She looked at Eliza once, then away. Cyrus's lawyer asked whether she had found Eliza and Garrett alone at the cabin. "Yes," Rosalind said. He asked whether Garrett had recently ended an understanding with her. Rosalind's hands tightened in her lap. "Yes." He asked whether Eliza appeared guarded and unwilling to consider propriety. Rosalind looked toward Eliza then. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Yes," she said slowly, "she was guarded." Cyrus's lawyer looked satisfied. Then Porter stood. "Miss Mercer, when you visited Miss Hartwell's cabin, did she behave recklessly?" Rosalind blinked. "No." "Did she invite scandal?" "No." "Did Mr. Vale conduct himself improperly in your presence?" Her throat moved. "No." "Did Miss Hartwell's cabin appear to be a fantasy, as Mr. Bellamy claims, or a real structure?" Rosalind's eyes flickered toward Cyrus. Then she looked at Eliza. "A real structure," she said. Cyrus's face hardened. Porter stepped closer. "Miss Mercer, you wrote that Miss Hartwell appeared proud. Did you mean unstable?" Rosalind sat straighter. "No." "What did you mean?" Rosalind looked at Eliza for a long moment. "I meant she stood like a woman who had very little left except her dignity," Rosalind said quietly. "And she was not willing to hand that over too." The room changed. Eliza's eyes burned. Garrett lowered his head. Cyrus looked as if Rosalind had struck him. Porter nodded. "No further questions." Then Abigail testified. She was clear, firm, and impossible to bend. She described the cabin, the stove, the food, the door, the child preparations, Eliza's calm condition, and Cyrus's trespass. When Cyrus's lawyer suggested her testimony was influenced by her son's feelings, Abigail looked at him as if he had tracked mud onto her clean floor. "Young man," she said, "I have disagreed with my son often enough to assure this court I do not borrow his opinions." Even Judge Marwick hid a small cough. Dr. Hensley testified next. Then Lottie presented the photographs. The judge looked at each plate. The south window. The stove. The crossbar. The bed corner. The table. The final photograph showed Eliza standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, her face steady, her body tired but unbowed. The room went silent. Then Garrett was called. He walked to the front and took the oath. Cyrus watched him with cold contempt. Porter kept his questions simple. Garrett answered simply. He described the first day he saw Eliza building. He described the roof, the walls, the work agreement, the signed paper, the way he always worked under her direction. Cyrus's lawyer rose. "Mr. Vale," he said, "are you in love with Eliza Hartwell?" A sound moved through the room. Eliza's heart stopped. Garrett did not look at her. He looked at the judge. "Yes," he said. The word was calm. No shame. No performance. Only truth. The lawyer smiled like he had won. "Then your testimony is hardly neutral." Garrett nodded slightly. "No, sir, it is honest." The smile faltered. Garrett continued before anyone could stop him. "And loving her does not change what I saw. It does not change the roof. It does not change the stove. It does not change the legal claim. It does not change that Cyrus Bellamy entered her home without permission and took her papers. It does not change that she built a safe place for her child when he offered only control." The room was still. Judge Marwick leaned back. Eliza could not breathe. Garrett finally looked at her. His eyes said what his mouth did not. "I told the truth, nothing more, nothing less." Then Porter called Eliza. She stood slowly. The room blurred for a second, then steadied. She walked to the front, placed one hand briefly on the witness chair and sat. Porter asked her why she left. Eliza looked at Cyrus. Then she looked at the judge. "I left because my child and I were being arranged, not loved," she said. "I left because my husband believed concern gave him ownership. I came here not to hide but to build. The cabin in those photographs is not a scandal. It is my answer." Porter asked what she wanted. Eliza placed both hands over her belly. "I want to remain on my land. I want my child born in a home where her mother's voice is not corrected before she speaks. I want the chance to raise her under a roof I built with my own hands." Cyrus's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He approached with a soft voice. "Mrs. Bellamy, are you saying your husband never provided for you?" "He provided rooms, not freedom." "Are you saying you prefer a rough cabin to a respectable home?" "I prefer a home where I am a person." He pressed harder. He asked if she had acted emotionally, if she had accepted help from Garrett, if she had considered the shame, if she understood the risk of childbirth in a remote place. Eliza answered each question plainly. Then he made his mistake. "Is it not true," he asked, "that this whole performance is simply stubborn pride from a woman unwilling to obey her lawful husband?" The room went quiet. Eliza looked at him. Then at Cyrus. Then at Judge Marwick. "My father taught me that wood remembers being forced," she said. "So do people. I am not here because of pride. I am here because I remember what being forced felt like, and I will not teach my child that obedience is the same as love." No one spoke. Not even Cyrus. Judge Marwick looked down at the papers before him, then at Eliza, then at the photograph of her cabin. "The court will recess briefly," he said. Eliza stepped down from the witness chair on legs that felt unsteady beneath her. Garrett rose but did not touch her. She looked at him anyway. For the first time in front of the whole town, she did not hide what his nearness meant to her. The judge would return soon. The decision would decide everything. Whether Eliza stayed in the home she had built. Whether Cyrus could drag her back under his name. Whether June would be born beneath a roof, raised by courage, or carried into a life chosen by someone else. and as the courtroom waited, Eliza placed one hand over her belly and whispered so softly only she could hear it. "Hold on, little one, we are almost through the storm." The courthouse waited like a held breath. No one spoke much during the recess. People shifted on the hard benches, whispered behind gloved hands, and glanced between Cyrus Bellamy, Garrett Vale, and Eliza Hartwell, as if they were watching the final card in a dangerous game turn over. Eliza sat at Porter's table with her hands folded in her lap. They did not shake. That surprised her. After everything, she had expected her body to betray her. But it remained calm, as if every nail she had driven, every board she had lifted, every cold night she had endured had been training her for this exact chair in this exact room. Behind her, Garrett stood near the bench. He did not crowd her. He did not touch her shoulder or lean close with comforting words. He simply stayed where she could see him if she turned her head. Abigail Vale sat beside Dr. Hensley, straight-backed and fierce in her silence. Rosalind Mercer stood near the window, her face pale but composed. Eliza had not expected to feel gratitude toward her, yet she did. Pain had not made Rosalind cruel when it mattered most. That was not a small thing. Across the room, Cyrus spoke quietly with his lawyer. He did not look frightened. Men like Cyrus rarely let fear show plainly. But Eliza knew him too well. She saw the tightness at his mouth, the stillness in his hands, the way he looked once toward the photographs on the judge's desk and then looked away as if the cabin itself had insulted him. He had expected a woman hiding in shame. Instead, he had found a house with walls, witnesses, and a door that could close against him. Judge Marwick returned after 20 minutes. Everyone rose. The judge sat, adjusted the papers before him, and looked over the courtroom with a face that revealed little. Eliza sat only when Porter gently touched the back of his chair and lowered himself first. Judge Marwick looked at Cyrus. "Mr. Bellamy, this court recognizes the seriousness of a husband's concern for an expectant wife, an unborn child. It also recognizes the legal weight marriage carries in matters of household and family." Cyrus's chin lifted slightly. Eliza's heart gave one hard beat. Then the judge turned a page. "However, concern does not excuse trespass. Marriage does not erase a woman's personhood, and a court does not remove an expectant mother from her established residence on the basis of rumor, wounded pride, or the discomfort of neighbors." The room went still. Eliza could not move. Judge Marwick continued. "The evidence before this court shows Miss Hartwell has filed a lawful claim, established residence, built a structurally sound dwelling, secured heat, food, water access, and medical evaluation. The testimony of Mrs. Abigail Vale, Dr. Hensley, Mrs. Green's photographs, Mr. Porter's documents, and Mr. Vale's observations support that conclusion." Cyrus's lawyer stood. "Your Honor." "Sit down, counsel." He sat. The judge's voice hardened. "As to Mr. Bellamy's request for temporary removal, this court denies the petition." A sound moved through the room. Eliza closed her eyes. Not long. Only for one breath. One clean breath that did not belong to Cyrus, or gossip or fear. Denied. The word rang inside her like a church bell. Judge Marwick was not finished. "Furthermore, this court is troubled by testimony that Mr. Bellamy entered Miss Hartwell's residence without permission and removed personal documents. Those documents are to be returned immediately. Any further interference with Miss Hartwell's claim, residence, property, or movement will be viewed seriously by this court." Cyrus's face had gone white around the mouth. Eliza looked at him then. Not to challenge, not to gloat. To see clearly the man who had once seemed large enough to fill every room she entered. Sitting there now, he looked smaller. Not harmless, perhaps, but smaller. A man whose power had depended on private walls, polished manners, and people believing him before they believed the woman he controlled. In daylight with witnesses, he was only a man. The judge looked at Eliza. Miss Hartwell, you are advised to remain in regular contact with Dr. Hensley or another qualified physician as your delivery approaches. You will also provide the court with a forwarding address for any further legal correspondence. Beyond that, this court sees no reason to disturb your residence. Eliza stood because Porter nudged her gently. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. Her voice did not break. The hearing was over. But the room did not empty at once. People seemed unsure how to leave a story once it refused to end the way they had expected. Silas Pike slipped out first with his wife close behind him, both avoiding Abigail Vale's gaze. Dr. Hensley shook Porter's hand. Lottie Green packed her photographs with a satisfied little hum. Rosalind approached Eliza slowly. Garrett stepped back, giving the women space. Rosalind's eyes were bright, but she held herself with dignity. I did not come here intending to help you, she said. I know. I was hurt. I know that too. Rosalind looked down at her gloves. But when they asked me to make your pride sound like madness, I could not do it. Eliza's throat tightened. Thank you. Rosalind nodded once, then looked at Garrett. He removed his hat. Rosalind. I hope, she said, voice steady though it cost her, that next time you care for a woman, you are braver sooner. Garrett accepted the words like he deserved them. I hope so too. Rosalind turned and left the courtroom alone. Eliza watched her go with a strange ache in her heart. Not all endings were joyful. Some were simply honest, and honesty still hurt. Cyrus waited near the door. For a moment, Eliza thought he might leave without speaking. Then he turned, holding the recovered tin box in one hand. His lawyer stood a few paces behind him, tense and embarrassed. Cyrus walked toward her. Garrett did not move. Abigail did not move. Eliza did. She stepped forward and met Cyrus halfway. He held out the box. Your things, he said. Eliza took it. My things. His eyes narrowed slightly at the correction. You have made a public spectacle of yourself, he said softly. No, Eliza answered. You did that when you stole from my home. His face tightened. I was trying to protect my child. Eliza rested one hand over her belly. You never asked who this child was. You only asked what claim you could make. Cyrus looked around the room, aware of ears. Eliza, even now, I would be willing to settle this privately. There is nothing left to settle. You are still my wife. For now, she said, but I am no longer your house, I am no longer your silence, and I am no longer afraid of your reasonable voice. For the first time, Cyrus had no smooth answer ready. Eliza stepped closer, not enough to invite anything, only enough that he could hear her clearly. If you ever come to my land again without permission, I will not meet you as a wife begging to be believed. I will meet you as a homesteader with witnesses, documents, and a court order behind her. Cyrus stared at her. Then he looked past her at Garrett. Garrett's face was calm, but his eyes were hard. Cyrus must have seen something there he could not polish into advantage. He adjusted his gloves, turned, and walked out. The door closed behind him. Eliza stood still for several seconds. Then her knees weakened. Garrett stepped forward, then stopped just as quickly. Eliza. She looked at him and gave a shaky laugh. I am standing, she said. His face softened. Yes, ma'am. Porter came over, gathering papers. You won today. This is not the end of every legal matter, but it is the end of this petition. Eliza nodded. That is enough for today. It is more than enough. Abigail joined them and placed a hand on Eliza's arm, just once, brief and firm. You did well. The words were simple. Eliza felt them like sunlight. Outside, Mercy Ridge had changed shape. The same street, Same hitching posts, same mercantile windows, same people pretending they had not been hungry for her downfall that morning, but now they looked at her differently. Some with shame, some with surprise, some with respect they should have given sooner. Eliza did not need all of them. She had stopped needing a town's permission to be whole. Still, when Amos Reed ran down the courthouse steps and grinned at her as if the whole world had just been set right, she smiled back. His mother stood behind him, twisting her hands. "Miss Hartwell," Mrs. Reed said, cheeks red, "Amos may continue bringing your mail if you still have need." Eliza looked at the boy, then at his mother. "I do," she said, "and I pay fair." Mrs. Reed nodded quickly. "Yes, yes, of course." That small repair mattered more than Eliza expected. The ride home happened near sunset. Not because they had to wait, but because Abigail insisted Eliza eat first, Porter insisted she sign 3 papers, and Dr. Hensley insisted she sit down long enough to prove she could obey at least one sensible instruction. Eliza nearly argued, then remembered resting was not quitting and sat. By the time she and Garrett reached the trail toward her claim, the sky had turned soft rose and gold. The hills looked washed clean after the storm. Birds moved low across the grass. The air smelled of pine smoke and wet earth. Garrett rode beside her. For a long stretch, neither spoke. Words felt too small after the courthouse. At last, Eliza said, "You said it." Garrett looked over. "What?" "In court, when they asked if you loved me." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I said the truth." "You did not have to say it so plainly." "Yes," he said, "I did." She looked at him. He turned then, meeting her eyes. "If I had tried to soften it, they would have turned it into shame. I will not make loving you sound like something dirty just because Cyrus wanted a weapon." Eliza's chest ached. The trail narrowed near the creek, and they rode single file for a while. This time, Garrett let her go first as always. When the path opened again, he came beside her without being asked. The cabin appeared through the trees as evening settled. Smoke rose from the pipe because Abigail had sent her driver ahead to light the stove. The south window glowed amber. The roof, still rough in places, held the last sunlight along its edge. The door stood closed, crossbar waiting inside. "Home." Eliza stopped her horse. For months she had imagined reaching this moment. A cabin standing, a legal victory, Cyrus gone from her land. Yet now that she was here, the feeling was not triumph exactly. It was tenderness. She had built the cabin to survive. Somewhere along the way, it had become a place where hope could enter and not be treated like a trespasser. Garrett dismounted and came to help her down, then paused before offering his hand. Eliza looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his. He helped her carefully, with no display, no pulling her clothes, no taking more than she gave. Her boots touched the earth, but she did not let go right away. Garrett noticed. "Eliza," he said softly. She looked up at him. "I am still not ready to be anyone's wife," she said. "I know. I do not know when I will be. I know that too. And if you are waiting because you think one day I will need you enough to make it easy, you should stop now." Garrett's eyes held hers. "I am not waiting for you to need me. I am hoping one day you might choose me." The words moved through her slowly. "Choose. Not obey, not depend, not surrender, choose." Eliza looked at the cabin, then at the yard where he had stood beside her in gossip, storm, fear, and court, then at his hand still holding hers, patient and warm. "I choose this," she said. "For now you may come tomorrow." A smile touched his face, gentle and bright enough to break her heart open a little. "I will come tomorrow. And you may bring coffee." "Yes, ma'am. And your mother may come when the baby is near." "I will tell her. And you may keep saying the truth. Eliza said, her voice trembling, "even when I do not know what to do with it yet." Garrett's thumb moved once across her knuckles, so lightly it was almost not there. "I can do that." The weeks that followed did not turn life into a perfect song. That would not have been true. Cyrus did not vanish from the world. Lawyers still wrote letters. Porter still answered them. The divorce proceedings would take time, and some people in Mercy Ridge still whispered because whispers were easier than apologies. But the important things changed. The cabin was finished before the first hard frost. Garrett came most mornings, always knocking, always asking, always leaving when she needed quiet. Abigail came twice a week with food, advice, and no patience for foolishness. Amos brought mail again. Lottie sent framed copies of 2 photographs, the cabin from the south and Eliza in the doorway. Eliza hung the second one inside the cabin, not from vanity, but as proof for the child. "This is what your mother looked like when she refused to disappear." Rosalind left Mercy Ridge for a teaching post in Helena. Before she went, she sent Eliza a small parcel with white baby cloth inside, and a note that read, "For June, if that is still her name." Eliza cried over it longer than she expected. Winter came early. Snow covered the roof in soft white silence. The creek froze at the edges. Smoke rose daily from the pipe. The little cabin glowed at night like a lantern cupped in the hands of the valley. And in the deep cold before Christmas, June Hartwell was born. Not in fear. Not in Cyrus Bellamy's house. Not beneath a roof chosen by someone else. She was born in the cabin her mother built, while Abigail Vale gave firm instructions. Dr. Hensley complained that nobody listened to him, and Garrett waited outside in the snow with 2 horses, 3 blankets, and a face so pale Amos later claimed he looked worse than Eliza. When the baby's first cry rose through the cabin, Garrett took off his hat and bowed his head. Inside, Eliza held her daughter against her chest and wept without shame. June was small, strong-lunged, dark-haired, and furious at the cold world. Eliza laughed through tears. "That's right," she whispered. "Tell them you are here." Abigail wrapped the child carefully and looked at Eliza with eyes softer than usual. "She has your fight." Eliza smiled, exhausted and glowing. "I hope she has more peace." Later, when the room had quieted and the snow fell thick beyond the window, Garrett was allowed inside. He came slowly, as if entering a church. Eliza sat propped near the stove with June asleep in her arms. The firelight turned everything warm. The table stood nearby, the old wooden rattle waiting on it. Outside, Garrett's boots had left deep prints in the snow. He stopped a few steps away. Eliza looked at him. "You may come closer." He did. His eyes filled when he saw the baby. He did not try to hide it. "June," he whispered. Eliza smiled. "June Hartwell." Garrett nodded. "That is a fine name." "She will know who she belongs to," Eliza said. Garrett looked at her, herself. Eliza's heart filled so suddenly she could hardly breathe. "Yes," she said, "herself." He sat beside the bedroll, close but careful, and for a long while they simply watched the child sleep. There was no grand confession that night, no rushed promise, no sudden wedding to tie the story neatly with a ribbon. Love, Eliza had learned, was not made safe by speed. It was made safe by truth repeated until the heart could believe it. So Garrett came the next morning. And the morning after that. He brought coffee, chopped wood, held June when Eliza asked, left when she needed rest, and never once made patience look like suffering. Spring found the cabin still standing. By then, the court had granted Eliza legal separation and protection of her property. Cyrus returned east with his pride wounded, his control broken, and his name far less polished than when he arrived. Justice did not come through revenge. It came through records, witnesses, courage, and a woman refusing to let shame speak louder than truth. On the first warm day of May, Eliza stood outside the cabin with June in her arms while Garrett repaired the fence near the creek. Wildflowers had begun to open along the slope, small yellow ones pushing through the grass like tiny suns. Garrett looked up and saw her watching him. "What?" he asked. Eliza shook her head. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. It was the sight of a man working on land he did not own because he had been welcomed there. It was the sound of her daughter breathing softly against her shoulder. It was the door behind her, open by choice. It was the quiet knowledge that love had not entered her life by breaking down her walls. It had waited at the gate until she opened it. Garrett walked over, wiping his hands on a cloth. June reached one tiny fist toward him. Eliza laughed. "She chooses who she likes." Garrett smiled, and there was sunlight in it, a wise habit. Eliza looked at him for a long moment. Then she placed June gently in his arms. Garrett went still. The baby settled against him, as if she had always known the sound of his heartbeat from outside cabin walls and winter doors. Eliza watched them together and felt the last hard knot of fear inside her loosen. Not vanish. Perhaps it never fully would. But loosen enough for joy to breathe. Garrett looked at her over June's dark head. "Eliza," he said quietly, "I am still waiting." She stepped closer and rested one hand on his arm. "I know." His eyes softened. She smiled. "That is why I am not afraid of choosing." The wind moved through the pines. The creek sang beyond the fence. The cabin stood behind them, sunlit, strong, and simple, with a roof that had held through storm and snow. And Eliza Hartwell, who once built walls because she had nowhere safe to go, finally understood that a true home was not the place where no one could reach you. It was the place where the right person could stand beside you, and you still remained free. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more romantic Wild West stories where love does not trap, courage does not shout, and the strongest hearts are often the ones that learn to stand alone before choosing someone to stand beside them. By summer, folks in Mercy Ridge no longer spoke of the pregnant woman who built a cabin alone, as if she were a warning. They spoke of her as a beginning. And whenever the evening sun fell across the south window, Eliza would sit beside Garrett on the porch, June asleep in her arms, and remember the first nail, the first storm, the first time a man had admired her strength without trying to own it. The cabin had started as her answer to fear. It became her answer to love.